to walk past Matt, but he held her wrist, stopping her. He looked at Tanya, who had changed so much. Now she had short blonde hair and wore her makeup differently than when they were married. Instead of just one earring in each ear, she now had several. Her lips were bright and full. Tanya's body looked different too. She appeared more exaggeratedly curvy. Through her thin dress, some jewelry and a tattoo were visible. Matt couldn't find words as Tanya stared at him, shaking her head not quietly, hoping only he would see. Before long, someone bumped into Matt, making him look over. A tattooed guy stood there, shining with gold jewelry, holding something sharp against Matt's side. "If you don't let go of my girlfriend's arm by the time I finish speaking, you're going to regret it." Matt let go of Tanya, who stood still, fear on her face. He looked at her with cold eyes. "Listen, I don't know what's happening here, but look at me when I'm talking to you." Matt slowly turned to face Mickey, his anger clear, while Tammy moved closer to Mickey's side. Mickey watched both of them, sensing something wasn't right. He asked Tammy, "Do you know him?" "No, it's my fault. I turned with a tray and didn't see him," she replied. Mickey glared at Matt and then turned back to Tammy. "What's your problem? She said sorry. Why did you grab her?" At that moment, two big bouncers arrived and Matt's group moved in behind him. "I was just making sure she didn't hurt herself with that broken glass," Matt explained. "Okay, now just back off and enjoy your night. If you come too close to my girlfriend again, you'll regret it. Understand?" "Yeah, I get it. She's all yours." Matt continued to look at Tanya, hoping she understood that he meant what he said. After their last meeting, he had turned against her completely. Seeing how she had changed only strengthened his feelings. In his mind, she looked cheap. Mickey ordered new drinks for their private VIP area. To show that Tammy was with him, he stood behind her, kissing her neck while his hands reached around, clearly trying to be affectionate in front of Matt. Matt went to the bar to order some drinks. After getting the drinks, Matt took them back to their VIP table and then walked into the club, leaving the VIP area behind. He was filled with many emotions: anger, surprise, sadness, and a deep sense of loss. He had lost his lovely wife and he couldn't understand how this had happened. How could she abandon their relationship and end up with someone like that? It was clear she was involved with a rough man, but what had pushed her to make this choice? Matt tried hard to push these thoughts away. He drank, danced, and chatted with others until he was too drunk to think straight. Stumbling out of the club, he made his way back to the hotel and into his room. He fell on the bed, feeling dizzy. Memories of his earlier meeting with Tanya swirled in his head. Crawling to the bathroom, he barely made it to the toilet before he got sick. Eventually, he fainted on the bathroom floor. Warm water woke Matt up. Feeling fuzzy and confused, he realized he was sitting fully dressed on the bathroom floor in the shower. He looked up and saw someone outside. "Hey, buddy, you were not in a good shape. I thought it would help to get you under the shower. I'll go make you a cup of coffee. You should take off those clothes and wash them as best you can here. Hang them on the radiator to dry." It was Mark, his co-worker, who was sharing a room with him. Matt nodded and started to get up, ready to clean himself up. 10 minutes later, he came out of the bathroom wearing a robe and sat on the bed. Mark handed him a strong cup of coffee. "All right, Matt. I won't dig too deep, but I could tell you knew that woman from the club. I have experience reading people's faces and actions, so I know there's more to this situation." Matt looked down at the floor and started to cry. He felt the pain of losing his wife, even though he was angry with her for what she had done. As he calmed down, he began to share his whole story, starting from a childhood accident up to the present. "Wait a second, Matt," Mark interrupted. "Did you mention the guy was named Lance? I think I know him. It's a small world. He wasn't part of my unit, but we were at the same camp. I remember him a bit. His wife didn't fit in with the others, so they moved away. I heard other wives say she was looking for a way to get more freedom. She was kind of left out, if I remember right." Matt continued his story until they sat there talking. Other than Tanya's old boss, Graham, Matt had never shared his story. "I'm really sorry, Matt. That's a tough story. My wife left me a few years ago, so I understand how you're feeling. Do you think she's involved in something secret and believes she can return to you later? It seems off. She might be in a bad situation or influenced in some way, but something feels wrong with it all." They sat quietly as Matt stared at the floor, holding his coffee cup. "Listen, I know people who might have information about ongoing cases, maybe about your wife if you want to think of her that way. There are those who owe me favors and will help if I ask. I've pushed my past aside for personal reasons, but I want to help you, even if it's just to figure out why she has chosen such a strange path. I think it's important to learn about these people, Mr. Smith and Mr. Jones, as I have a feeling that you may not be done with them yet. Matt looked at Mark and thanked him. It was 3 in the morning and he was exhausted from the shock of finding Tanya and from drinking too much. He climbed into bed full of mixed emotions and quickly fell into a troubled sleep. The next day they left the hotel and had a few last drinks before taking the train back to London. Matt felt quiet and expected many questions. He didn't know that Mark had asked the others to let Matt be for now, and that he would share his story when he felt ready. All Matt could think about was how this had happened. Why had his wife changed so much to become the person he had seen in the club? While Matt was lost in thought, Mickey had many questions. It was clear that something deeper had happened besides the dropped tray. Tammy had dropped it in shock, and he could see she was trying to hide what she was feeling. He asked her several times that evening what was wrong, but she kept saying it was her fault for not noticing someone behind her. Once they returned to their area after the incident, he noticed her behavior and body language had changed, as if she were hiding something. But what could it be? He decided to look into it the next day by checking hotel security footage and the identification of guests who checked in. Once he had a lead on who this guy was, he would get Lucas Jones to help investigate further. By Sunday lunchtime, Mickey had found a scan on his phone showing an identity card for Matt Andrews, the man from Saturday night. Tammy had improved, but she wasn't quite herself yet. He considered pushing her for more information, but decided to wait until he learned more from Lucas. They drove to Mickey's mom's house for dinner, and Matt noticed that Tammy seemed to relax after a few minutes in the car. He thought she may have been worried about more questions. This made him believe it wasn't just a random occurrence. Meanwhile, Matt returned to his apartment and saw a message from Sandra on his phone. He had been seeing her more often, and she was becoming more like a girlfriend. He replied to her message, and then she video called him. "Matt, you look terrible. Did you have a wild night?" "Yeah, I really overdid it last night and feel awful. I need to take care of myself and go to bed early. I have day shifts starting tomorrow." "Oh, that's too bad. I've missed you and wanted to come over to show you how much." "Sorry, Sandra. Can we meet after work tomorrow? I'll treat you to dinner then. Does that work for you?" I guess so. I'll have to call one of my other friends tonight since my favorite toy isn't working." She laughed and sent him a kiss, and he returned the gesture before ending the call. A few moments later, she sent him a restaurant reservation for the next night, and he replied simply, "See you then." Matt then called Graham. "Hey, Matt, it's been a while. How are you?" "I found her, Graham." There was a short silence. Graham's tone showed his concern. "Is she okay? Did you talk to her? Where can I find her?" "Slow down, Graham. The Tanya we knew is gone. If you saw her in the street, you probably wouldn't recognize her. She ran into me. She goes by the name of Tammy now and is with a guy named Mickey who owns a nightclub, casino, and other businesses around South End. You can find her picture in an article online about hotels in South End." "Matt, you know who this Mickey is, right?" "Yeah, I looked him up today. I was at a stag weekend and bumped into her at his nightclub. I think he might be why she left everything behind, but I still don't get why she made that choice." Graham was typing on his laptop as Matt spoke. "Matt, are you serious? That blonde woman is Tanya? I wouldn't have recognized her. Do you think something's wrong with her? I'm going to come there and see if I can get into the club." "Graham, you wouldn't get in, and if you did, you'd stand out too much. We need to figure out if she's okay. If she's in trouble, we have to find a way to help her, Matt." After a moment, Matt said, "I have an idea, Graham. I'm going to try to get close enough without being noticed, so I can find out if she is there by her own choice or if someone is making her stay. If it's her choice, then we can leave her be. I want to forget about her and move on." They talked about this for a while. Graham mentioned he would investigate Mickey, but Matt said it was not worth it. It was her life to lead now. "Matt, I feel so guilty. I let Smith and Jones get close to her even though I tried to stop it. This is my fault. If I had paid more attention, I could have changed things." "I don't think you could have, Graham. As I think about it now, I remember how hesitant we always were when discussing work and family. We didn't see how much she wanted to succeed, and that's what Smith and Jones took advantage of. But I told you it's too late for us. We cannot go back to being a couple. After they ended the call, they looked at how to learn more about Tanya's life. Matt considered wearing a disguise to return to the club. After thinking it over for a day, he decided to shave all his hair off and grow a beard. That should make it hard for people to recognize him, as long as he kept his distance. 3 weeks later, Matt and Sandra checked into a nice hotel close to the casino and nightclub in South End. They planned to spend Saturday night and Sunday there, enjoying a good meal, visiting the casino, and then going to the nightclub. Matt showed Sandra the VIP passes he had bought, and she was thrilled. Once they got to their room, Sandra said she wanted to take a shower before anything else. Matt sat on the bed, looking up nearby bars and attractions to pass the time, while he waited for her to finish. When Sandra came out of the shower, she had a playful smile on her face and asked if he had any fun ideas for the night. She stood in the doorway, wearing a bright blue outfit that hugged her figure. Her legs had cute patterned stockings that added to her look. She walked to Matt, playfully unbuttoning his shirt and making it clear she wanted to be close. She felt happy seeing his excitement. Climbing onto the bed, she positioned herself above him and reached down to touch him a few times. Lowering her body a bit, she let him gently slide against her skin, feeling the connection with each movement. She smiled down at him playfully as she gradually lowered herself. "I think it's time to see how this goes." With that, she slowly sank down. The warmth of their connection deepened as she moved. She lifted herself again, then lowered herself, picking up speed until they were fully engaged. She was breathing heavily, taking in all of the air she could. The rest of the afternoon passed as they stayed in bed, enjoying each other's company until they finally drifted off to sleep. Sandra looked stunning in her black dress and heels. The dress fit her perfectly, drawing attention as she walked. They enjoyed a meal at a wonderful Mexican restaurant. Toward the end of the meal, Matt excused himself to go to the restroom. Sandra sat thinking about him while he was gone. She noticed he seemed different, a subtle change since his weekend away. He appeared restless, as if something was bothering him. During their meal, she had mentioned taking a longer vacation together, but he seemed distant when she talked about going to Amsterdam. When Matt returned and sat down, she decided to ask him directly. "So, Matt, what's going on? You seem different since you were last here, and is everything okay with how you look? It seems like you're hiding." She said this with a smile, trying to keep it light, but there was a hint of concern in her tone. Matt looked at her, taken aback. "I'm not hiding. Why do you think that?" "Well, for starters, you've started to grow a beard and your head is shaved. That's quite a change. You also seem a bit distant. Am I boring you?" Matt laughed lightly and took her hands in his. "No, you're not boring at all. I'm sorry, there's a lot happening. I've had some issues with my tenants not paying rent back in Bournemouth and trying to resolve that. As for my look, I thought I'd try something new because someone mentioned I was thinning my hair. I thought you might like the new style." It sounded like excuses, and Sandra wasn't entirely convinced, but she didn't know him well enough to be certain. If he was hiding something, what could it be? She was cautious. Her last boyfriend had lied to her, and she didn't want to go through that again. When they arrived at the casino, the mood seemed to settle. Matt appeared more relaxed. By 10 p.m., they were leaving with smiles, having won a couple £100. They went to a nightclub, joined the short VIP line, and were soon shown to the special area. The VIP section had 3 levels. The top was a big private area, while the middle had seating for parties, and the bottom was just tables and chairs set up for groups. Matt had come in early because he wanted to sit away from the top section. He hoped to see if Tanya looked comfortable. This time, there were 4 waitresses taking orders. Last time, only 2 were available because of a COVID outbreak among the staff. Sandra looked around the club and was fascinated. She saw a male dancer moving on a stage nearby. She glanced at Matt, who seemed a bit anxious and restless. She wanted to help him relax. "Are you sure you want to be here?" she asked. "You're right. We should just enjoy ourselves, right?" He stood up, took Sandra's hand, and they headed to the dance area to enjoy a few songs. After about 30 minutes, they returned to the table for a drink and a break. Matt noticed that the top section was still empty. A little later, a man, a woman, and a large guard walked in and headed to the top section. Many people watched them as they approached. Mickey wore a sharp blue checkered suit that stood out. His big gold rings shone under the lights. Tammy wore a very short black dress that hugged her figure. It shimmered as she moved, drawing attention as she climbed the stairs to the private area. "Oh, wow, Matt, did you see that woman? Her dress looked like it was painted on, and those tattoos on her legs? She was stunning. I can see why she's with that guy. He seemed serious." "Do you think they own the place?" "I guess so. They have a bouncer making sure no one gets too close." They were sitting and drinking, and Sandra kept glancing up at Tammy. She admired Tammy's bold tattoos and envied her confidence in wearing such a daring outfit. While Sandra's feelings leaned toward envy, Matt was more concerned about whether Tammy was there willingly, but she seemed perfectly fine. Soon, another couple joined them, and the two women began chatting happily. Matt saw enough to report back to Graham that Tammy was okay and that he wasn't too concerned. He didn't want to see her again after tonight. Matt and Sandra continued to switch between dancing and taking breaks at their table. Just as they were about to leave, Matt heard a familiar voice behind him with a hint of an Australian accent that made him tense up. "I thought I recognized you. A bit late, but glad you made it." Matt's heart raced as he recognized Mr. Jones, who was waving to someone in the VIP section. Lucas pointed at Matt, and although Mickey didn't know him or Sandra, he waved for all of them to join him. "Looks like you're moving up in the world. Come on, let's go thank our host." Sandra was puzzled, but figured that Matt must have known this man from the stag party. However, she felt excited about being invited to join the owner and his friends, enjoying the jealous glances from other VIP guests as they moved up. Well, look who it is. Couldn't stay away, huh? I like the new haircut, but maybe it's not just the place." Mickey greeted them warmly, but Matt sensed it was insincere. Then Mickey seemed to freeze, staring at Matt, his expression shifting. "No, it's not the place, it's—" Suddenly Mickey burst out laughing, slapping his thighs as everyone else looked confused, trying to understand what was so amusing. After a few moments, he calmed down, wiped a tear from his eye, and came over to Matt, throwing an arm around his shoulder. "I think we should introduce ourselves, don't you? What's your name, beautiful?" Mickey was looking at Sandra. "Oh, I'm Sandra. Matt had brought me here for a romantic evening," Sandra said. Mickey chuckled and shook his head. "Sandra, I think your boyfriend might be keeping you in the dark a little bit," he teased. Mickey introduced the group in the VIP area, which included his sister Tammy, her husband, and Lucas Jones. Then, pulling Matt closer, he made his next announcement. "Everyone, this is Matt. He used to date Tammy a while back, and I do mean that boyfriend." Everyone but Sandra, Tanya, and Matt laughed. Sandra shot an angry look at Matt, who was staring at Tanya, trying to avoid eye contact with anyone. "This is too funny. Why aren't we on one of those TV shows where they give you money for catching moments like this on camera?" Mickey joked. He waved over a waitress and ordered a bottle of champagne, then turned to Sandra. "Sandra, why don't you sit down with us? Lucas, make sure she enjoys herself. Show her how to dance properly. I need to have a little chat with Tammy and Matt in the office." Mickey, along with two bodyguards, then led Matt and Tammy to his office. The room was large, with a meeting table and a few sofas arranged around a coffee table. The whole time, Matt and Tammy stayed silent, exchanging worried looks. Mickey pointed at a chair, and the bodyguards pushed Matt down into it when he hesitated. They tied his wrists to the chair. Mickey whispered something to one of the guards, who left the room. Mickey turned his attention to Tammy, who stood still, fear evident on her face. She was trying to figure out what was going to happen, worried that Matt might reveal too much about their past. "You lied to me when I asked if you knew him, and I found out the truth," Mickey said, his voice cold. "I'm not happy about that. I'll deal with you later, but first, Matt needs to understand where he stands." Mickey glared at them, his anger clear in the tense atmosphere. Tammy, desperate, tried to speak. "Please, Mickey, it was a long time ago. Let him go. Before she could finish, Mickey stepped closer to Matt, his actions deliberate and threatening, sending a clear message of control without saying another word. The tension in the room grew, and it was clear that things were not going to end well, but no more words were needed to make that point. Mickey's voice was sharp and commanding. If you want even the slightest chance of him making it through tonight, now. Tammy's eyes filled with tears as she hesitated, the weight of Mickey's demand crushing her. She moved closer to Matt, standing just a couple of feet away. Matt, his emotions swirling, refused to let his tears fall, though they threatened to. Mickey positioned himself behind Tammy, leaning in close as he stared at Matt, who was trying to look away. Mickey instructed his bodyguard to force Matt to face them. Matt closed his eyes tightly. "Open your eyes or you'll regret it," Mickey snapped, his voice laced with threat. "And you, keep looking straight at him." Reluctantly, Matt opened his eyes. Mickey's smirk grew as he maintained control over the situation, sending a clear message of power and dominance without needing to say more. Mickey's tone remained cold as he continued speaking to Tammy, mentioning past events and asserting control over her. He made it clear that stepping out of line would come with severe consequences. Meanwhile, Tammy's desperation grew as she tried to reason with him. "Please, Mickey," she begged. "I should have told you everything from the start, but it was just an accident that we ran into each other. You know you're the only one for me." Just then, the other bodyguard returned with a bottle of strong alcohol. Mickey nodded, and the guard moved to Matt, gripping his face tightly. Despite Matt's attempts to resist, he was forced to swallow a large amount of the drink, coughing and sputtering as it went down. Once it was done, Mickey's voice cut through the tension. "Get dressed," he ordered, signaling an end to the standoff but leaving the air thick with unease. Mickey stood over Matt, leaning in close to whisper in his ear. "You should be grateful for tonight. You're getting a special show, and you've got the best seat in the house." He stepped back, chuckling to himself, and pushed Tammy back toward the club. She wanted to glance at Matt, but she knew that would only make things worse. Tammy was worried about what Mickey had planned, and she decided to find Lucas later, hoping he might help. Back in the club, Mickey joined the group in the VIP area, though Sandra was nowhere to be seen. "Where is she?" Mickey asked Lucas. "I handed her off to Eduardo," Lucas replied. "He was ready for a break, so I told him to dance with her, get a little closer than usual. I think he appreciated it better than dancing solo all night." Mickey looked down and spotted Sandra dancing with one of his professional performers, smiling to himself. "I trust you made sure she had something strong to drink?" Mickey asked. "Yeah, in about an hour she'll be out of it," Lucas responded, laughing. Mickey laughed along with him. Tammy looked at them both, realizing Lucas wasn't going to be of any help. She felt a sinking feeling and knew things were only going to get worse. Meanwhile, Matt's head spun as he slowly regained awareness. The sounds around him were confusing and unsettling. He tried to lift his head, but the overwhelming smell of vomit made him gag again. As his senses started to come back, he realized his hands were tied to a chair. Memories of where he was slowly returned, and he tried to focus on the noises in front of him. Through his blurred vision, the world around him began to sharpen, and what he saw made him sick once again. In front of him, the unsettling sight confirmed his worst fears, making his stomach churn even more. Tears mixed with his nausea as he realized the disturbing reality of the situation, leaving him helpless and overwhelmed by everything happening around him. With a slur, he begged, "Please stop. This has nothing to do with Sandra. Let her go." "You're foolish," the other replied. "You should have considered that before using her to get close to Tammy. Just look at her now." After a while, Sandra trembled, and Lucas held her down. Matt, affected by both alcohol and the scene, lost consciousness again. One of the guards poured ice water over him to keep him aware, and they supported his head as they watched the unsettling situation unfold. Eventually, the women were made to kneel in front of Mickey and Lucas. Although Matt couldn't see everything clearly, he could hear unpleasant sounds as the situation continued. It seemed like Sandra was in a difficult position, and soon he lost track of it all again, despite the cold water trying to keep him alert. This horrible scene played in his mind until he either shut it out or focused on just surviving. When he woke up, he felt cold and could smell the salty air that comes from being near the sea. Rolling over, he found himself in a parking lot behind some shops near a bin piled with trash. He managed to stand, feeling unsteady and clammy from too much drinking. He found his wallet but no phone and started to stagger back towards the hotel. It was 4 in the morning, At the hotel, he didn't have his key card and had to convince the night manager that he was a guest before getting a new one. He entered the room expecting to see Sandra, but she was gone. After a moment, he noticed all her things were missing. She had checked out. He returned to the desk and asked the manager if a young blonde woman had left recently. The manager confirmed she had left with a man. Matt assumed it was Mr. Jones. Despite feeling terrible, anger filled him. Back in the room, he took a shower and plopped onto the bed, quickly falling deep into sleep. He was awakened by knocking on the door he had slept past the checkout time. He opened the door and apologized, asking for 10 more minutes to pack. After leaving the hotel, he walked into town to buy some pain relievers and grab a coffee. Before that, he found a store selling used electronics and purchased a second-hand smartphone that was charged, along with a Pius Hugo SIM card. While sipping coffee, he set up the phone and downloaded his backup data from the cloud. He called Sandra, but it went straight to voicemail. He decided not to leave a message and kept calling until she picked up. He took a train back to London and headed to his temporary apartment. He called Graham using a special phone just for him. He shared what had happened, saying that Tanya was there of her own choice and that he never wanted to see her again. He asked Graham to not mention Tanya again and promised to keep in touch as a friend. Later that evening, he went to Sandra's apartment and rang the doorbell. When she answered, she had a cut on her lip and her voice was hoarse. Tears rolled down her cheeks as she partially closed the door to talk to him. "I hate you. I understand now why you were so distant. I was just someone you used to get to your ex. Just leave me alone, Matt. Look at me. I've ended up with someone who got too involved. He brought me back here and... She started to cry, and Matt tried to open the door to comfort her. "Don't come near me. This is all your fault. He said if I go to the police, I'm in trouble. Do you have any idea who you've brought me into? Just stay away from me. I wish I had never met you. Please, Sandra, let me in. I need to explain. Hello, police. There's a man harassing me at my door." While he was talking, Sandra called for help. She stared at him with anger in her eyes. Matt turned and walked away, feeling defeated. His struggles with Smith and Jones had taken Tanya from him, and now it seemed like Jones had taken Sandra too. He felt like this was a battle, and he was determined to fight back. When Tammy woke up Sunday morning, she was alone and started to cry. This was not how things were supposed to go. She needed to reach Matt and explain that everything had gone too far. She looked in the mirror and felt unhappy with herself. Why had she let things escalate like this? She felt as if two parts of her were arguing, slowly realizing that she was starting to lose control. The next time she met Mr. Smith, she needed to insist on seeing Matt. She sat on the bed and hoped that Matt was okay. She felt sympathy for the woman with him. She had been through a lot, but at the same time, she was relieved that Matt was hers. Tammy was supposed to see Mr. Smith, who was pretending to be a doctor for her mother in a care home. After getting dressed and ready, Mickey took her keys and said she was going for a drive with him to visit an old friend. Mickey felt cold and distant, making Tammy uneasy as she remembered his words from the night before. They rode in the Range Rover, crossing over to rural Kent on winding country roads. A sense of fear washed over her as she thought about how to keep herself safe from Mickey's intentions. They finally arrived at a big gated property with a large house and a repurposed barn. "Where are we, Mickey?" Tammy asked, her voice shaking. "This is my oldest friend, Tony T. We went to school together. I talked to him this morning, and he's eager to meet you. He'll help you understand where you stand, Tammy." Tammy looked at Mickey, her face pale with worry. "Don't worry," Mickey said, trying to reassure her. "You'll be driving out later, sitting in that seat, going home with me. You just need to spend some time with Tony." As they entered Tony's home, Tammy felt nervous, looking around. Tony didn't seem threatening. He was more like an older fan of games. They talked for about an hour and a half, and Tammy started to feel a bit more at ease. It seemed hard to believe that this man would be involved in any punishment. Suddenly, the loud sound of a motorcycle broke the calm, echoing through the woods around the property. "Let's go outside to meet my friend DeFazio," Tony said. "You have an appointment with him, Tammy." Mickey stood and extended his hand to Tammy. She took it, unsure of what was happening, as they made their way outside. There stood a man who looked like he belonged in a movie about a tough future. He wore old black leather and had a crew-cut hairstyle. A face mask covered much of his face, with a zipper across his mouth and holes for breathing. His bright blue eyes peered out from the mask, looking at Tammy in a way that made her shiver. She grabbed Mickey's arm, feeling increasingly anxious. Mickey calmly approached Tammy and took her arm, guiding her away as she protested. "You know what happens with betrayal, Tammy. This time you'll leave here, but next time, who knows?" he said. DeFazio pulled Tammy towards the barn. Once inside, he closed the door behind them. Mickey followed Tony into a small room filled with computers. Tony indicated for Mickey to sit and watch 2 screens showing video from the next room, complete with high-tech graphics. This was what Tammy would see when she put on virtual reality goggles. Mickey stayed behind as Tony went to help DeFazio with Tammy. What Tammy didn't realize was that Tony had unusual interests. Mickey had heard that someone was creating advanced equipment that could change the way people experienced certain activities. He received a phone call asking how things were going and if he could bring his girlfriend to try it out. He explained that she needed some discipline, and he felt strongly that something needed to be done to fix it. Mickey wasn't allowed in the room, but his friend Tony had just the right person to help. His new friend, known as DeFazio, would handle everything. Even though Mickey couldn't be there, Tony promised that the view from the screens would be interesting. He also knew that Tammy was pregnant, and while the physical effects were minor, it was all about how the mind interprets experiences. For the next 2 hours, Mickey watched DeFazio work. He felt like he was watching a master at his craft. When Tony revealed who DeFazio was, Mickey found it amusing. It showed how easy it was to mislead people with the right stories. Eventually, it all came to an end. DeFazio left the barn, hopped on his motorcycle, and drove off without saying a word. Mickey thought it was great. He asked Tony to thank him and mentioned that they were doing something special together. They took Tammy inside, and Tony insisted she take time to relax in silence. She kept glancing at herself, expecting to see a difference. The virtual experience she had felt so real that she thought she might not make it through. After 4 hours, they helped Tammy into the car and wrapped her in a blanket. The ride home was quiet, with Tammy staring blankly out of the window. When they arrived back in Essex, Mickey said before getting out of the car, "Next time it won't just be virtual, it will be real, and you know how that could end." Tammy nodded slowly. It had been a frightening experience, and she knew she wouldn't survive if it were real. This confirmed in her mind that things had gone too far. The following weekend, they were supposed to fly to Dubai on Friday for a week with Lucas. On Monday, Tammy received an unexpected call from the care home about her mother. The doctor said there was a serious change in her mother's condition and that Tammy needed to visit and discuss options. She knew it was just Mr. Smith trying to get an update. She put her phone on speaker so Mickey could hear. Aware that Mickey might have trust issues for a while, she tried to be open. Mickey suggested that Lucas come with her while he took care of his own matters. Lucas and Tammy traveled in relative silence. She always felt uneasy around him. His behavior towards Sandra showed he had little respect for women. They entered an office, and for the first time in months, the 3 of them could talk openly. The meeting did not go well. Mr. Smith didn't know that Matt had accidentally met Tanya a few weeks earlier and had come back to see her just last weekend. Mr. Smith was frustrated with Mr. Jones, who had a direct link to Matt and had met him a couple of times. Things got worse when Mr. Smith suggested that Mr. Jones was sharing more information than he should with Mickey's team instead of with the government. As the discussion heated up, it was Tanya who raised a key question. "Mr. Smith, what exactly are we looking for? It's not just Mickey's operations. There's something more. You asked if Mickey had confided in me. What is our goal? I've had enough of this and want out soon. If it doesn't happen quickly, I will leave, and if I can't see Matt soon, I will leave even faster." From earlier talks he had with his American colleagues about Tanya, he was warned she might start to struggle. He thought this was a sign it was beginning. Mr. Jones was becoming harder to reach, and he knew he was close to making a big change. He was already planning an alternative approach and hoped to convince Mr. Jones and Tanya to finish their mission. He stood up from the desk and looked out at the gardens of the nursing home. Operation Culebra is just a cover for what you are really doing. The actual operation is called porn. Only a few know about it because it is classified. There are no written or electronic records, and all communication must happen in person. I apologize. but we had to keep this from you both due to protocol. The goal was for at least one of you, especially you, Tammy, to get close enough to find out where the object we need is located. The object is an SD card. That card holds information that could harm this country. If you see or discover it, you'll know right away that it's what we need. We understand there are backups and we have plans to manage those later, but we need the original card to resolve everything. I shouldn't share this, but we have to work towards an end. Has Mickey ever hinted at where it might be or shown you something important? Tanya answered. Yes, he did. He said he would tell me something when the time is right, but I did not know what he meant. You need to press him for answers. I know you're in a tough spot, but when things get better, try to find out where it is. Tammy, I need to talk to Mr. Jones for a moment, so please go sit with your mother. Tanya stood up and walked away, feeling uneasy about the secret conversations happening around her. You are keeping things from me, Polly. I told you before to choose your side carefully. Can you explain why former military people from the government are asking about Tanya and Mickey? No, I can't. Do you think Matt has talked to someone? I wasn't there when Matt first showed up, but Mickey asked me to learn more about him. Luckily, the story about the tattoo and being a college boyfriend worked and helped. I thought Mickey would handle him, but he didn't. If Matt comes back, Mickey has made it clear he'll deal with him, but what about what she wants? Should I help with that? No, let it be for now. At least I can keep an eye on her by coming here, but if we lose this connection, we'll be in trouble. Polly, remember what I said? Keep in mind which side you're supposed to be on. We need to find a way to get what we want. Lucas Jones left, thinking of his plans. Smith had pointed out the weak link, and he intended to take advantage of that. He figured out when Mickey might tell Tammy what was on the SD card, or, even better, where to find it. He was not changing sides. He was going out on his own with whatever he could take. Meanwhile, he would check on some of Matt's friends to see if there was any connection. On his way, he talked to Tanya. He's not going to let you see Matt. He thinks it's too dangerous. I've had enough of this. I can help you if you help me. We are supposed to go to Dubai on Friday. What if I get us a couple of days away from that so you can see Matt and work things out? In return, you help me find the SD card. Knowing Mickey, it won't be hidden away easily. I'll look for it in Dubai, and you look at home. If you find it, let me know, not Smith, okay? If you can get me a couple of days with Matt, then yes, I'm in. On Wednesday, Lucas Jones told Mickey he was following up on some information and would be in touch on Thursday before their trip to Dubai on Friday. He also wanted to know if Mickey was really sure that Matt was completely out of the picture, and if Tammy would try to reach out to him again. He aimed to plant a little doubt in Mickey's mind. On Thursday morning, Lucas went back to Peterborough, dressed like a doctor with fake identification. He entered a care home room and gave a patient something that would lead to her passing away. Before she was gone, Lucas left and started heading south on the M11 motorway towards Essex. A few hours later, the care home called Tammy, the only family member listed, to inform her about her mother's passing. Tammy acted like a grieving daughter. An hour later, Lucas called Mickey to go over details about Duba. Mickey shared that Tammy's mother had died, but he felt uneasy about leaving her alone. Lucas suggested that Mickey go meet the Russians alone while he stayed with Tammy, then arranged to bring her out on a flight scheduled for Sunday. They agreed to this plan, and Mickey flew out the next morning. On Friday, Matt had a long 12-hour shift. After work, he went back to his apartment to collect the mail. As he approached his door, someone coming the other way suddenly grabbed him, and he felt a sharp sensation in his neck. Mr. Jones had come into the building minutes earlier, walked down the hall, and timed it perfectly as Matt opened his door. Wearing a baseball cap and jacket helped conceal his identity. He called Tammy to tell her to come up to the apartment. When Matt came to, he found his arms stretched out above him and unable to move. Looking around, he saw that his wrists were in handcuffs attached to his bed. Sitting on the edge of the bed was Tanya, dressed in a flowery dress. "Please, not again. Don't do this, Tanya." "Sorry, I wasn't sure you'd want to see me, but I promise we can work this out, Catch. I promise we can find a solution." Catch, he hadn't heard that name in months. It used to mean something different, but now it felt wrong. "Let me go, Tanya, or whatever your name is. You signed the papers to end our marriage willingly. I was forced to sign mine. There's nothing left to fix. Do you really think keeping me here like this will help? If you care about yourself, let me go and forget this ever happened." She leaned forward to kiss him. but he turned his head away. Instead, she kissed his cheek while her other hand traced down his chest. "We used to have fun like this, and you enjoyed it. My work has just been acting. What I feel for you is real, and I want to show you just how much you're out of touch with reality, Tanya. Look at yourself. You don't see the truth of the situation, do you? I gave you a choice when we were in France. That day, when I asked you to choose between coming home to me or staying with your job, nothing has changed. No, wait. I'm wrong. You manipulated me, tricked me into signing that crazy agreement, and then you hurt me. Do you understand? You forced yourself on me as part of this twisted game you're playing." He felt a sharp slap across his cheek. "I told you I would reach the top, and now I have," she replied coldly. "I'm coming back soon, and I'll keep my promise." Matt started to laugh, at first quietly, but soon it grew into deep, uncontrollable laughter that turned into tears. He looked at her and saw nothing but anger in her face. She stormed out of the room and came back with Mr. Jones. Instantly, Matt's laughter stopped. His body tensed as Jones approached. Matt tried to struggle, but Lucas pushed him down and injected him with something. As the world started to blur, he heard a voice, soft but distant, telling him they loved him and always would. When Matt woke again, he was disoriented, his mind clouded. He felt someone on top of him, moving. Through his foggy vision, he saw a woman, but his thoughts were too scattered to recognize her fully. She slowed down and leaned forward, wiping his chin before whispering something in his ear. Her words were muddled in his mind, lost to the haze. Matt tried to move to understand, but he was too weak, too confused. Later, when Matt came to once more, his head was pounding. His throat was dry, and he felt a desperate need for water. Barely able to speak, he called out for help. To his dismay, Tanya entered the room, wearing a silk robe and holding a bottle of water with a straw. He tried to sit up, but realized his wrists were cuffed to the bed. He was sure he had been free earlier, but everything was now a blur, a mess of broken memories that didn't make sense. Tanya placed the straw in his mouth, and he drank the water quickly, desperate to quench his thirst. She looked at him with a satisfied smile, but Matt shattered the moment with a hoarse whisper. "I hate you. I wish I'd never met you. You've destroyed my life. Please, leave me alone. Get out and don't ever come back. I want nothing to do with you. Understand that?" Tanya's expression hardened, but she didn't say a word. She removed her robe and moved closer, though Matt's mind was too far gone to protest. The fog from the drugs still lingered, leaving him powerless to stop what was happening. As the room remained silent, Matt's thoughts drifted away, overwhelmed by the confusing mix of emotions and exhaustion. She leaned forward and wrapped her arms around his neck as she started to pull herself up and down. She tightened her grip as she began to make it difficult for him to breathe. Trying to break free, he began to struggle, feeling more and more trapped. In a moment of panic, he looked directly into her eyes and realized something was very wrong with her. She smiled back at him, showing no sign of understanding. Finally, she let him go, and he breathed in deeply, grateful to be free. Matt woke up again, this time in a dim room. His head throbbed and his body ached. His wrists were sore, but thankfully he was no longer restrained. He carefully got off the bed and stumbled around his apartment, which was empty. By the kettle, he found a folded piece of paper addressed to him. Inside was a short message. "I know you don't feel it yet, but we can fix this. We did before and we will again. I'm almost finished, and then we can have our family and put this behind us. Love, Tan." Matt stared at the note, unable to believe what he was reading. As much as he despised her, he realized she truly needed help. He called Graham to share what had happened and express his concern for Tanya. Graham mostly agreed, but didn't say much else. Matt prepared a light meal and noticed it was 11 a.m. on Sunday. He wasn't sure how long it had been since Tanya left, but he had some fragmented memories. He remembered Mr. Jones giving him something and warning Tanya that it could be harmful if they continued. He guessed they must have left late Saturday or early Sunday. Snippets of memories flooded back, and he understood why he felt so bruised. As the day went on and his mind cleared, he started to think of a plan for revenge. He recalled a conversation years ago with Wendy, Anne's friend, when she gave him a letter from Anne that said she was gone for good. Wendy had told him that every action leads to a reaction, and every choice has its consequences. When Tanya vanished from his life, he had chosen to move on. The consequence was that his relationship with Tanya had ended, but she seemed determined to come back into his life. The last few weeks had pushed him to his limit. He wanted justice, and he was going to make sure they faced the results of their actions. Mickey was glad to see Tammy and Lucas Sunday evening in Dubai. He noticed Tammy was in a much better mood than he had anticipated. In fact, she seemed very lively and energetic during their time together. They had shared an intimate moment before he left for Dubai, but it had felt different since what happened at the club the week before. Even after what happened with Matt, the punishment she faced, and the loss of her mother, she seemed happy now. He talked to Lucas, who thought that maybe the end of her mother's suffering brought her some relief. It was a bit strange, but he thought women could be hard to understand. They only had a couple more days there because Mickey had finished the business part of the trip. While Matt had some time off between his shifts, he started to make plans. He rode his KTM to explore the roads around Mickey's club. The parking lot he ended up in was shared between the club and some food takeout places. There were always delivery scooters going back and forth, sometimes parked outside when it was quiet. Matt bought 2 vehicles for cash. One was an old delivery scooter with a big delivery box, and the other was a Volkswagen Passat with a knocking sound, which seemed like it was near the end of its use. He gave a fake address for the scooter, but all he got was official paperwork for the car. The best part was the dark-tinted windows on the VW. He found a business area near South End and parked both vehicles where they wouldn't be noticed for a few days. He used the scooter to hang out behind the club for a few nights but didn't see Mickey or his crew. So, he decided to wait until the weekend. On Friday night at 3 a.m. after his long work shift, he went back to the club. He parked behind the takeout restaurant and spotted a Range Rover and an Audi R8 with special plates. He guessed they belonged to Mickey and Mr. Jones. Holding some empty pizza boxes, he watched staff leave until he saw Mr. Jones get into the Audi. Mr. Jones glanced at Matt while he loaded the pizza boxes onto the scooter and then quickly drove away. Matt hopped on the scooter to follow, keeping a safe distance behind the Audi. The Audi drove out of South End toward the main road to London, which didn't matter to Matt. He found a good spot for the next part of his plan. After work that day, he went straight to bed and set his alarm for midnight. Using a number plate he had taken from a bike the night before, he stuck it over his KTM's number plate in a pull-off area just outside of South End. He hid the KTM at the edge of an industrial area, making sure there were no visible security cameras. Then, he took off his bright nylon suit and helmet and hid them in a nearby scrap bin close to his bike. He wore simple black clothes and a baseball cap to cover his face as he went to get the Bulgarian-plated VW parked deeper in the industrial area. He drove it to the club and parked it tightly at the entrance. He thought he needed at least a 30-second head start on Mr. Jones for his plan to succeed. Just after 3 a.m., Jones came outside. Matt quickly set off in the same direction Jones had taken the night before. When he reached about 100 meters from a junction, he stopped next to the curb and turned on the hazard lights. While he waited, he opened a petrol can and spilled it inside the car. He signaled to pull out just as the Audi went by. When the Audi stopped at the junction, Matt opened the door of the VW a moment before it bumped into the back of the Audi. He rolled out of the car, closed the door quickly but left the window open, and crouched down beside the car to light a flare. "Hey, what are you doing?" Matt heard the Audi door open, and Mr. Jones walked toward what he thought was the driver's door of the VW. However, being a left-hand drive car, it was actually the passenger door. As he heard Jones open the door, he threw the flare inside. The petrol fumes filled the car, and flames quickly burst out through the window and the open door. He heard Jones shout, so he hurried around the VW and pushed him from behind, causing him to fall. Jones tried to put out the fire on his hair. Matt grabbed a small bat he had and hit both of Jones's hands before striking his ribs. He was about to hit him on the head when he noticed someone from a nearby house yelling at him. Calmly, he moved back into a cul-de-sac where he had hidden his scooter in some bushes on an empty property with a for sale sign. He grabbed his helmet and put the bat inside, then rode off down the road. As he left, he saw people helping Jones, who had been pulled away while the 2 cars burned. Matt took the scooter back to where the VW had been and used petrol stored in the box to burn it, along with his helmet and bat. He walked back to find his KTM, dressed in his usual riding gear with a plain black waterproof suit over it, and headed toward London. Instead of taking the main road, he chose some smaller roads and stopped on a country lane with a bridge over a stream. There, he removed the number plate and suit before tossing the plate into the water and throwing the suit into a waste bin. He rode back to the A127 at the next exit, headed into London, and went straight to work. He hoped for an easy day ahead. He had taken 2 weeks off for a holiday to Ibiza, which he really enjoyed. When he got back to the UK, he worried about going through passport control, but it turned out to be fine. He returned to his apartment, feeling a bit cautious, but everything seemed normal. The next day, he went back to work, keeping an eye out for any trouble. Lucas Jones had burns on his face and head, lost a third of his hair, had 3 broken fingers on one hand, cracked ribs, and a broken wrist. While waiting for the ambulance, he asked if anyone had noted the license plate of the car that hit him, but all they knew was that it was a Bulgarian vehicle. He had encountered them before, but not recently. He wondered if Mickey had upset someone, leading to this incident as a warning. But first, he needed to heal. The next morning, Mickey and Tammy visited him in the hospital. Mickey insisted he had no problems with the local Bulgarians and thought it was just someone from his past returning to haunt him. No one discussed or suspected Matt to be involved in the attack. The police looked into the incident but were aware of Lucas's connection to Mickey. Like Mickey, they thought it was linked to gang activity. Although they investigated, they didn't put much effort into the case beyond some basic inquiries. The following day, he left the hospital and Mickey drove him home. With his injured hands, he needed help for a week or two, and he didn't have his own car. After speaking with Tammy and Mr. Jones, Mr. Smith learned there was a risky alternative to their current plan. After a meeting on Monday, his feelings of betrayal deepened when he received a call on Thursday from the care home saying Tammy's mother, who was pretending to be a patient, had died suddenly. He arranged for her body to be taken for an autopsy. What the care home didn't know was that it would be done at a specialized government facility linked to certain government operations. The next week, it was confirmed that she had a rare toxin in her bloodstream, a substance favored by the Russian SVR, similar to the UK's MI6. Reviewing security footage from the care home, the person trying to conceal their identity was someone Mr. Smith recognized. There was no turning back now. A few days after leaving the hospital, Mr. Jones accessed the police report about his attack. He noted the chassis number from the VW and reached out to Interpol for details about its last known owner. Once he had that information, he knew where to begin. He had a few appointments at the hospital to discuss skin graft surgeries because of his burns. Mickey asked Tammy to drive him around while he handled business matters. They talked about who might be responsible for the situation, but they weren't close to the truth yet. When Lucas and Tammy were alone, they talked about the SD card and wondered where it could be. They decided safes wouldn't help since the authorities could search Mickey's places if they got a warrant. They tried to guess what the SD card contained and suspected it might involve serious issues with the government. The next weekend, Mickey and Tammy went to his sister's house for Sunday lunch. Since Lucas was staying with them, he was invited too. That morning, Tammy woke up feeling unwell. It surprised her because she hadn't drunk too much the night before. She thought maybe it was something she had eaten. During lunch, the smell of the roast parsnips upset her stomach. Feeling pale, she excused herself and went to the bathroom, where she felt like she might be sick. Mickey told his family that Tammy hadn't been feeling well that morning. His sister left the room and got a pregnancy test kit from her room, then knocked on the bathroom door. When Tammy opened it, she was handed the test kit. "I'm not pregnant. I think it's something I ate. I have a birth control implant," Tammy said. "When was your last period, Tammy?" Mickey's sister asked. Tammy made a face. "I'm a week late. I thought it was just stress from that night." "Tammy, please take the test. At least it'll ease your mind if you have the implant," she urged. Tammy took the kit and closed the door. Following the instructions, she took the test. Her hands trembled as she saw the result she was pregnant. In shock, she set the test down and looked at herself in the mirror. She felt a wave of anger and disappointment crash over her. Overwhelmed, she sat on the toilet seat and cried, staring at the test kit on the floor. A few minutes later, there was a soft knock at the door. It was Mickey's sister again. "Tammy, are you okay? Can I come in?" she asked. Tammy opened the door, looking devastated with red eyes from crying. She reached for Mickey's sister and began sobbing. His sister noticed the positive test kit on the floor and quickly picked it up, leading Tammy back to the dining room. "Can I have everyone's attention, please? I think Tammy has something she wants to share," she announced. Everyone turned to look at Tammy and noticed her tear-streaked face, sparking concern among them. All Tammy could do was stare blankly at Mickey, unsure of what to say next. After a moment, Mickey's sister finally showed everyone the test kit. Mickey's mom was the first to react, shouting excitedly, "Oh my God, Mickey, you're going to be a dad!" Dinner was forgotten as everyone began celebrating with cheers, hugs, and congratulations. Only Tammy stood still, looking shocked. Mickey placed his hands on her waist and smiled at her, but she didn't seem happy. He pulled back, confused. His sister then pulled him into the kitchen. "What's wrong with her?" he asked his sister, clearly upset. "Mickey, just calm down. She's in shock. She's overwhelmed. Remember, she said she wasn't ready for kids yet and wanted to wait another year. This wasn't planned, so just give her time. It might take a couple of days for her to adjust, so please be kind to her." Mickey let out a half laugh. "Women, right? You can't live with them, can't live without them. Are you sure that's all it is?" His sister nodded and hugged him tight. "Mickey, you're finally going to be a dad." In the dining room, Tammy looked at Lucas, who was sitting quietly with a smirk. She realized he likely had a part in what had happened, possibly during her doctor's visit. While Mickey was away, Lucas gave Tammy a quick hug and whispered in her ear, "Now use this to figure out what we need so we can leave." When he stepped back, she glared at him. It felt like he had only been looking out for himself. But she also thought about the possibility that the baby could be Matt's just as easily as it could be Mickey's. Feeling uneasy, she excused herself to lie down in a bedroom. Lucas, returning to his seat, found the situation amusing. He had figured out how Tammy's cycle matched up with the dates, and knew she might be fertile when he brought her and Matt together, especially after a few days with Mickey in Dubai. That fake implant had certainly done its job. He thought this might lead Mickey to share more with Tammy and help him with his plans. As the weeks went by, the shock began to wear off, and Tammy felt trapped. She realized that Matt and Mickey were very different, and it would be clear who the father was when the baby arrived. With no direct way to contact Mr. Smith, she depended on Lucas to set up a way to communicate. She tried sending coded messages through online and printed catalogs, but so far she hadn't received any replies. She felt stuck. She managed to pretend everything was fine to keep Mickey happy, but she knew from her recent time with Matt that she didn't fit with Mickey. She began to think about finding a way to escape on her own. Not long after Mr. Jones spoke with Matt, Mr. Smith had a phone call with Mr. Jones. Jones told Smith he would visit him soon. Smith talked about the unexpected loss of Tammy's other mother. Jones didn't think much of it and brushed it off. Smith insisted to Jones that he needed to keep in touch, but he already knew Jones was not doing so. This became clear a couple of weeks later when Mickey's sister shared on Facebook that Tammy was going to have a baby. He had learned from Tammy earlier that she had gotten a new birth control implant a few months ago. Again, he suspected that Jones might be involved, but he wondered what Jones would gain from a pregnant Tammy. Lucas finally received some news he had been waiting for. 6 weeks had gone by since he was attacked, and Interpol had found an address for the owner of the car from Bulgaria. The owner had no known criminal connections and was a married plumber. He had traveled to the UK for work for a couple of months before returning home, as shown by his passport. Lucas flew to Bulgaria to gather more details himself. Lucas walked from a small house on the outskirts of Veliko Tarnovo, feeling excited. After being welcomed inside, the owner explained he had sold the car to fund his way home since it was in bad shape. He had posted the sale on Facebook, and a young Englishman had bought it. Lucas then showed the owner a picture of Matt, confident that he recognized the person who bought the VW. He thanked the owner but mentioned there would be a cost for this information since he had traveled all the way to Bulgaria. Within moments, the owner found himself tied to a chair and hurt. In his last moments, he was forced to watch a man do terrible things. As he felt himself slipping away, he shouted, and with his fading strength, he saw Lucas take action against his wife as well. Lucas felt a strange thrill in this chaotic moment. Soon after, Lucas was preparing to leave the country and think of ways to make Matt pay. He considered every option available to him and how he could gain from hurting Matt. By chance, he knew some additional information awaited him back in England, which might connect everything together. Mr. Smith had been looking into certain government offices to find out where the discreet questions about Matt and Tanya were coming from. He reviewed the file on the couple and remembered the troubled relationship noted in Matt's records. The question was whether this was merely a coincidence. His question became more interesting when he found that Jones had been investigating on his own, using his government connections without telling anyone. One of Matt's colleagues used to be in the SAS, but there is no record showing that Lance and Mark worked together. Did Matt share his plans and ask for help? He was working on a way to deal with Mr. Jones. He hoped Tammy could find that SD card before he had to make a tough choice about his former assistant. Taking care of Jones would come with risks for Tammy. When Lucas returned to England, he looked for Mickey and met him in the nightclub office. He slid his iPad to Mickey, showing a confidential file with the profile of a former SAS soldier. "What's special about him, Lucas?" Mickey asked. Lucas took the iPad back and showed a recent photo. It had the man with Matt sparring in a gym and a picture of his fire brigade ID from the stag weekend. Mickey sat up, anger flashing across his face. "This guy is working with Matt, but I suspect he is an MI5 agent sent to the fire service to watch Matt and maybe influence Tammy." Mickey turned pale, stood up, and started pacing the office. "I think that's why they came here. First both of them together, then Matt tried to reach Tammy when we caught him. I've had the team check the video footage, and with the special scanning software, I think those were the only 2 times they attempted something here. You need to keep Tammy very close now." "I've heard enough, Lucas. I want this situation handled. For good." They spent the next couple of hours talking and planning. By the end, they were both laughing and ready to take action. Meanwhile, Mickey did not know about a conversation that Lucas had with Mr. Smith. Mr. Jones showed Mr. Smith security footage from the club to convince him they were trying to connect with Tanya on behalf of another government branch. Mr. Smith connected the dots, linking the secret inquiries back to Mark and likely Matt. He ordered Mr. Jones to address the issue. Lucas could already sense the revenge he was about to unleash on Matt. 3 weeks later, Matt's team was called to a fire in an old Victorian shop that had turned into a warehouse. The first report said it had been empty for a few years and had been used by homeless people and drug users. The fire was on the 4th floor, so while they worked on putting it out, others entered the building to check for anyone inside. Mark and Matt were tasked with checking the 2nd floor of a building. After about 5 minutes of searching, 2 people in a stolen BMW parked a short distance away were watching live camera feeds from inside the abandoned structure. Feeling confident that the men were deep enough inside, Mickey called a number on a disposable phone. Suddenly, a loud noise echoed, and there was a bright flash. The ground trembled as smoke quickly filled the area where the building had been. A small cloud rose from the debris of what used to be several buildings. As the dust settled, the buildings had vanished. Somewhere among the wreckage was Blue Watch. Meanwhile, Matt found himself in a small boat. He thought he was on a lake because the water was calm, but he wasn't sure. It was dark and misty, making it hard to see. He thought he heard voices calling him, though they were unclear. He looked around for land, but the fog was thick. To his surprise, a woman appeared, walking on the water through the mist toward him. As she drew nearer, he recognized Tanya, wearing a flowing white dress and smiling. He wanted to reach out to her, but realized he couldn't move. He was frozen in place. Still smiling, she brushed her hair from her face. Leaning toward him, she placed her hand on his chest. A sharp pain shot through him, and he shut his eyes tight, hoping it would go away. When he opened his eyes again, a woman with short blonde hair and many tattoos was staring back at him with dark eyes. She raised her hand, which was stained, and reached for his heart, taking a bite before tossing it into the water. Then she sank slowly, keeping her eyes on him until she disappeared. The mist thickened, blocking out the light and making it hard for him to breathe. Matt found himself engulfed in darkness, struggling for air. His eyes fluttered shut. "Okay, everyone, clear." The paramedics stepped back from the still body as the defibrillator sent a jolt through it, causing the muscles to twitch. They reset the machine and tried again, but there was no response. After one last attempt, they found a weak pulse. In the following minutes, they set up drips and injections before moving the body into an ambulance. With a worried expression, the fire station commander spoke to the paramedics as they began closing the back doors of the ambulance. "Do you think he will pull through?" As they closed the doors, one of the paramedics replied, "If I had to guess, I wouldn't count on him making it to the hospital." With that, the ambulance sped away, while more emergency vehicles continued to arrive at the scene of the unfortunate event. In her home in Essex, Tammy woke up feeling unwell, a feeling that had become her morning routine. Like most mornings, she turned on the TV to catch the news while sipping a glass of water. The sound was muted, but news headlines scrolled across the bottom of the screen. She saw that there had been an explosion somewhere that had damaged several buildings. The camera showed a fire truck that was in bad shape, with emergency workers moving swiftly around the fallen buildings. A feeling of worry settled in her stomach as she turned up the volume. It seemed a fire crew was searching the building when the explosion happened, possibly due to a gas leak. Reports mentioned one loss of life, and 5 firefighters were taken to the hospital with various injuries, including one in a critical state. Sitting there, a sense of dread filled her as she realized it was in London. She knew Matt was there and prayed it wasn't his shift. Panic set in, and she started flipping through the channels for more information. When that didn't work, she turned to the internet. Mickey entered the kitchen, noticed the TV screen, and increased the volume. After a while, he glanced at Tammy and said, "What a bunch of foolish people. If you play with danger, you'll get hurt one day. Looks like someone got hurt." He gave Tammy a strange smile. She wondered if Mickey had looked into Matt's life and was trying to get rid of him. He had taken Matt's phone weeks ago, and Lucas had managed to access it. They had enough information about Matt, but Mickey didn't know how much Lucas truly knew. Mickey wanted Tammy to go with him to the club today to discuss their marketing plans, leaving her with no choice but to agree. She would do her best to keep up with the news. Meanwhile, a stretcher was rushed through the hospital's emergency entrance, with staff moving quickly but with focus. Matt was taken straight into surgery, where a medical team was ready. The surgeon looked down at the young man lying before him. Though he didn't have much hope, he was determined to do everything possible, even with the odds against him. He knew Matt had been caught in an explosion, with a building collapsing on him. He was found under debris with a heavy beam on his chest and significant injuries. His leg was hurt badly, and he wasn't sure if they could help him. Somehow he had lost his mask during the chaos, and there was a big bruise on his head. His skull had a serious dent, which looked bad enough to possibly affect his brain. He began giving orders as the medical team worked hard to help the man lying in front of them. Later that day, when Tammy got home, she turned on the BBC News channel. The explosion was still a major story, and a picture came up of a fire brigade watch team. The next photo showed a man who had died, and then a new picture made her heart sink. It was a photo of Matt. She turned up the volume to hear what was being said. As the newsreader spoke in a solemn tone about what had happened, she sat on a chair, almost in a daze. Tears streamed down her face as she glanced at Mickey. He came over, stood her up, and hugged her with surprising kindness. "I may not have liked him, but this is tough, Tammy. I hope he makes it." Though those were his words, they didn't reflect his true feelings. It might be better for him to be hurt than to die, but as he held Tammy, she couldn't see the smug smile on his face. That same morning, Mr. Smith was having a light breakfast at home while watching the news about a possible gas leak. Seeing the destruction on the TV, he began to think this might not have been a simple accident. A few minutes later, he logged into his government portal to check the status. "Jones, I don't care where you are, but I want you in the office this morning. We need to talk about where our relationship is going." He had tried to call Mr. Jones earlier, but he knew he would show up eventually. While he adjusted his plans, he weighed the pros and cons of keeping their current situation going a little longer before they moved forward with Operation Doomsday. This plan was still being developed, causing some nervousness among those involved. It might be the only way to resolve this ongoing problem in the country. When Smith and Jones finally met, the meeting was tense at first, but eventually they both calmed down enough to make their points. Jones was frustrated that he had been left out of the loop regarding their goals. Smith was concerned that Jones was making important decisions that could hurt their plans. They still held back some information from each other, though. Listen, he started getting his team involved in plans to capture Tanya. I'm not sure another group in our building hasn't interfered by placing his friend Mark there to keep things uncertain. You know how it works. Keep the other team uninformed. Mickey's team was the one that found most of this information. That's why we decided to go after all of them. Smith thought about it for a moment. When things took too long or didn't go as planned, another part of the government often stepped in. With so much at stake, Jones could be right. What about her pregnancy? How did that happen? Okay, I should have talked to you about this earlier. Look, she's pulling away. Just see how deeply involved she is with everything Mickey has done as she tries to move forward. She's not coming back. We both know that. Remember a few weeks ago when she talked about leaving? I see signs that she's getting close to her limit. If we're lucky, being pregnant with Mickey's child might give her a reason to stay connected to him. We need to get that SD card and move on. Smith considered what Jones said. It made sense. This was going to be their last chance as they planned Doomsday. Jones shared some important news. The Russians had thought they could easily send weapons to Europe, then to the UK. But they got greedy, moved too fast, and lost the shipment along the way. Now they were sending smaller deliveries into Rotterdam so they could send one larger shipment from there. The downside was that it would take a while. They were making plans to ensure that the truck would enter the UK without any issues. When Jones showed the list of weapons likely being sent, Smith was surprised. The items were far beyond what street-level criminals typically used. This was the kind of equipment a terror group would dream of having. This could turn dangerous ideas into reality. He agreed to be informed about when and where the delivery would happen, so they could step in and stop it, possibly even cornering Mickey into giving up the SD card for his freedom. Jones mentioned it would take a few months due to some complicated details that needed addressing. However, it would happen. Mickey had already made a significant payment to the Russians. As Jones spoke about this, Smith could see a clear path to successfully running Doomsday. He had every angle planned out. Now, it was just a matter of waiting. After being taken to the hospital, Matt was on the operating table for over 8 hours. He died and was brought back to life twice, and now he was in a medically induced coma to help his body heal. The doctors planned to wait a short time to see if and how much his brain had been affected before deciding what to do next, which included the possibility of removing the life support that was keeping him alive. Meanwhile, deep within Matt's mind, some activity was happening. Receptors were responding to a familiar voice. He could hear Tanya crying, telling him she wished she had never left him. He wasn't sure if it was real or just in his mind. He could only understand things in a very simple way. She sat there holding his hand while the machines around him beeped and buzzed, either helping him stay alive or watching over him. The constant beeping meant things were okay. As she sat close, she told him again that she regretted leaving him and that she truly loved him. She begged him to wake up. She knew he might not hear her, but she felt she had to share her thoughts. She realized she made a big mistake when she left, and now she wanted to make things right. A nurse came in and spoke to her. "Aren't you tired? You've been here for a long time, and the records say he has no family. Are you?" "I'm his girlfriend." "Well, that's not quite right. I used to be his girlfriend, but we lost touch and then lost each other. I didn't know he was here until I saw it on the news. He has no family, so I thought. I thought we could start again when he wakes up. I believe this is meant to be." The nurse glanced at her fellow nurse's name tag. "Anne, since he has no family listed, would you like me to note your details?" Anne smiled. This was the happiest she felt in a long time. When Anne came to visit the next day, a police officer was sitting outside Matt's room. He was the only one from the explosion still in the hospital. She had to sign a register and show her ID, but the officer wouldn't say why he was there or how long he would be. It felt strange and a bit scary. For the next 4 weeks, the police officer stayed outside the room. Depending on her work schedule, she either visited before or after her shifts, and during her days off. She felt alone and wanted to be present for whatever happened next. Matt was still in a coma when his friend Mark was laid to rest. There were many people at the funeral, including lots of news reporters. It turned out that Mark had been in the SAS with his twin brother, who had died alongside him on duty. On that tragic day, Mark had watched his brother's life end right in front of him. A bomb was set off while they were near it. Even though Mark was hurt and in shock, he managed to help cover the others, saving some lives at the funeral. After that day, he carried a heavy feeling of guilt with him, like a burden he couldn't shake off. He lived with that feeling every day. After leaving the army, he found comfort in becoming a firefighter, where he could save lives instead of ending them. Some people at the funeral now realized that this was no accident. It had been planned. They were waiting for Mark's colleague, Matt, to wake up from his coma. They believed he was involved in this sad situation. Back in Bournemouth, Tanya's former boss, Graham, read about what happened to Matt. He was sure it wasn't just a coincidence. He had already done some quiet searching into Tanya's new life and had taken a few days off to follow her. With what happened to Matt, he felt that Tanya must realize it was time to step away from the chaos she had found herself in. He knew she had a regular appointment at the nail salon every 2 weeks at the same time. He planned to catch her then. Tammy parked her car in the public lot and walked down the small main street toward the pedestrian crossing. As she reached it, a man with a flat cap bumped into her. When she tried to move around him, he did too. At the last moment, he lifted his head so she could see his face. It was Graham. He told her to go into the pub, and she did. He pointed to a corner table and ordered 2 cups of coffee. He sat beside Tanya, ready to talk to her. The nail bar was directly across from the pub. Rita, the nail technician, had seen what happened and became uneasy. She called the owner of the nail bar. "Sorry to bother you, Mickey, but someone just stopped Tammy and took her into the Rose across the street. I didn't know him, so I thought I should let you know." 2 minutes later, the phone rang at the Rose pub. Mickey asked the landlord to quietly lock the front door. If anyone was inside, he should ask them to leave within 10 minutes. If the man with Tammy tried to go out, he needed to stop him. The landlord approached 2 regular customers who came in daily for a few drinks before heading to the bookmakers. He explained he needed to shut off the power and gave them £20 to spend at the bookmakers early. They quickly finished their drinks and waved goodbye. Soon after, Mickey entered through the back door with a big man named Claude. Just seconds into the conversation between Tammy and the man who stopped her, they noticed Mickey was there. Mickey sat next to Tammy, showing Graham the holstered weapon he had. Claude sat next to Graham and searched his pockets, pulling out his wallet. Mickey opened it, glanced at Graham and then at Tammy, and took a picture of Graham's police badge. He sent the picture to Lucas Jones, asking him to come to the pub fast. The conversation felt more like an interrogation. They questioned why he was there, why he confronted Tammy, and what he wanted. Graham had to think quickly when he saw Mickey. Remembering his talks with Matt, he claimed he was a friend and believed it was more than just an accident. He knew that Matt had seen Tammy in the club and was here to ask if she knew if someone was after Matt. He insisted it was completely unofficial and had nothing to do with the police. If they checked the badge, they would see he was out of his area. After Lucas got the call from Mickey, he immediately called Mr. Smith to share the news about Graham. "Get rid of him. Just him. And make it look like an accident. I want it done quickly. I respect the man, and I'm sorry he got involved." And that was it. A decision about Graham's fate was made in one simple phone call. The only thing troubling Lucas was how much Mickey might have learned. When Lucas arrived, Mickey and Tammy left the pub. Tammy glanced back at Graham, looking sad. At 11:30 that night, the driver of the express train from Southampton to London saw someone sitting on the tracks. Despite blowing the horn and trying to stop, he heard the awful sound every train driver dreads. He quickly used the radio to report an emergency. He had hit someone. When the police arrived, they found the last drops from a bottle of whiskey and a handwritten letter. The letter said the person couldn't face retirement and had kept their sadness private. They expressed love for their spouse and apologized for the trouble they caused. The note was written under the influence of the same drug given to Matt over a year ago. The alcohol would cover up any signs that could reveal the truth. After leaving the pub, Mickey quietly took Tammy home. He felt something was bothering him, but didn't want to say anything yet. Before approaching them, he listened for a moment. Graham had called her Tanya, and she didn't correct him. Lucas had taken her to Dubai the year before, and allegedly sat next to her on the plane. Lucas seemed to have his hands in many places. Gathering information, was he playing both sides? Mickey had his doubts about that. It was Lucas who found a corrupt person in the business. He helped Mickey send a message to his own people and the government. Lucas suggested gathering everyone who worked inside the business for a meeting at the club. The person seeking the SD card was caught and forced to kneel on the office floor before Lucas dealt with him in an unusual way. He poured a tin of expanding foam into his mouth, knowing it would quickly fill his lungs. As the man ran around the office looking for water or trying to stop the foam from growing, Mickey warned everyone. The next person who stepped out of line would find it hard to breathe, which would mean a slow end for them, much like what happened to the traitor before. After they quietly disposed of the body, Mickey made sure to leave enough evidence with it to convince the government that the SD card everyone talked about was indeed real. Since then, not a single sign showed that anyone was planning to betray Mickey. When Tanya spotted Graham outside the pub, she felt a spark of hope. She thought he might be the way out of the tangled situation she found herself in, but each passing day made it seem less likely she would escape. Tammy's mood continued to decline. Mickey noticed something was seriously wrong, which he attributed to her unplanned pregnancy. His sister had promised to visit, but she seemed to be moving away instead. Soon they would have a scan to see the baby. Maybe that would help. During the ultrasound, Mickey was overjoyed. He didn't just expect a child. He was thrilled to find out they were having twins, both boys. He couldn't wait to share the news with his mother that their family legacy would continue. But Tammy didn't share his excitement. Her smile looked weak and seemed more about sadness than happiness. On the way home, Mickey pressed her for feelings and she broke down. She expressed worry about her old boyfriend, Matt. She wondered if he was alive or not. Even though she was with Mickey now, she felt he should understand she had a past. Mickey was angry. What should have been a joyful day celebrating the babies was spoiled by her unfounded concerns. In that moment, he had an idea. The next day, Mickey, Tammy, and Lucas went to the hospital, each wearing baseball caps and keeping their heads down, trying to avoid being seen on cameras. When they reached the nurse's station, she looked at them and firmly said they couldn't enter Matt's room, even after they insisted they were friends. Lucas gestured for Mickey to sit with Tammy while he talked quietly to the nurse. He wrote a note that said to keep her voice down and to call a number. He slid it toward the nurse. She looked at the ID with his photo and read that he was a government employee. After taking the card, she made a discreet call. Once she handed it back to Lucas, she understood this was official business. Lucas signaled to Mickey and Tammy, suggesting they could go in now. He indicated that money had persuaded the nurse. Mickey and Tammy entered the room as Lucas waited outside. Tammy began to cry when she saw Matt connected to the machines, quietly beeping in a steady rhythm. A tube was placed in his mouth to help him breathe, his chest rising and falling steadily. His body looked fragile, marked with healing cuts and bandages from surgeries. One side of his head showed signs of a serious operation, with his scalp bruised in deep shades of red and purple from the trauma. Tammy approached him, holding his hand as her tears fell, trying to keep herself from breaking down completely. Mickey came over, briefly putting a hand on her shoulder before pushing her down gently. She resisted, but then he threatened to call Lucas for a final diagnosis on Matt, making her understand exactly what he meant. "Do what you're told, and we'll leave here with these machines still working. If not..." Tammy knew she had no choice. Defeated, she dropped to her knees. Mickey's actions were not about her, but about showing power over the situation, hoping Matt could somehow hear what was happening. For the next few minutes, Mickey spoke harshly, mocking Matt and degrading Tammy, enjoying the control he had over both of them. The atmosphere was thick with discomfort and fear. After a moment, Mickey stepped back, leaving the room filled with an oppressive silence. He leaned in close to Matt, whispering something cruel in his ear, words meant to taunt and torment. Tammy didn't hear exactly what he said, but she felt a chill run through her. Mickey helped Tammy to her feet, her face still streaked with tears and smeared makeup. He handed her the baseball cap she had worn when they entered. As they left the room, Tammy glanced back at Matt, noticing a single tear on his cheek. Her heart sank deeper with guilt and sorrow. As they walked down the corridor, a nurse approached, the cold tension between them unspoken but palpable. She saw them leave the room, looking very different from the kind of visitors Matt usually had. She hurried into his room and noticed something wet on his face and bedding. Gently, she wiped it away with a tissue. recognizing the unfamiliar scent in the clean hospital room. It was a strange smell, and she wondered why they had behaved that way. There was a trail of tears on his face, which meant he must be able to hear. She was determined to help him wake up from his coma soon. Anne stepped out of Matt's room to talk to the nurse at the station. The nurse explained that she didn't plan to let the visitors into Matt's room until someone from a government office told her to comply. He followed up with an email that instructed her to do whatever the man at the desk asked. Anne asked if she had made any calls since then, and found out she hadn't, so she picked up the phone and redialed. "Mr. Smith speaking. How can I help you?" His voice was confident and commanding. "Hello. Could you tell me why you are interested in Matt Andrews?" The call ended, and when she tried to call back, there was no answer. Anne sensed that something was wrong. The police had guarded Matt for weeks before they left a few days ago. She went to the hospital administrator to share what she had found out. The next morning, a police officer was back outside Matt's room. Tammy was becoming more troubled. Mickey now had a bodyguard with her at all times, unless she was with him or Lucas. He couldn't shake the feeling of unease because Graham had called her Tanya. "Lucas, do you think meeting Tammy on that flight was just a coincidence? I know you looked into her past, but I feel something might be off. When I walked in, Graham called her Tanya and she didn't respond." Lucas realized he had to be careful. If he was friends with Matt, he might have mixed up her name. He could be confused about what to call her. "I wouldn't worry about it too much, Mickey. If you think she's after something, I'll gather everyone for another talk about keeping quiet." "No way. She's carrying my kids. I'm going to keep an eye on her, and you should too. I have an idea that might help us find out the truth." Mickey called his doctor in Harley Street, who provided a contact for a top psychiatrist. After a visit to the doctor's office in London, he arranged for the psychiatrist to stay at Mickey's home for a week to help understand Tammy better. The doctor hesitated until Mickey showed him a picture of his wife at the gym. He casually remarked that Mickey had some attractive friends in South America who would appreciate her appearance very much. Mickey offered the doctor £25,000 and an extra $10,000 if he understood why Tammy was feeling unwell. Assuring the doctor that he would keep Tammy's information private, the doctor agreed to visit that week. By the 4th day of his stay, the doctor told Mickey he was done and was actually pleased he accepted the offer. He planned to write a paper for a medical journal because he believed Tammy's situation was special. When Mickey asked for more details, the doctor said he couldn't share anything due to patient privacy. Mickey casually connected his phone to the TV. He pointed at the screen, and the doctor gasped. His wife was at the gym, laughing and chatting with 2 fit young men. They looked like they were from Colombia. One of them even winked at the camera. Mickey said, "I mentioned to my friends that they might be interested in her. A few of them in London decided to come see your wife for themselves. She's quite impressive, Doc. They're eager to take her out." The doctor turned pale and sat silently, unsure what to do. He did not want to talk about the last few days with Tammy. He felt anxious thinking about Mickey possibly reading his notes while they were alone. He took out a file from his briefcase, still preferring handwritten notes, and placed it on the table in front of himself. "Your wife is, I believe, a special case. She has a condition known as dissociative identity disorder, or DID. Right now, she has 2 identities in one body. This began when she was a child but wasn't noticeable until later when her life goals conflicted. Her ambitions are to excel at work or to be the best mother. However, she struggles to balance both at the same time. This leads her to pursue one goal intensely while neglecting the other. The more she immerses herself in one aspect of her life, the harder it becomes to accept that the other part is fading away." The doctor started sweating as he looked at Mickey's face and decided against opening the file. Instead, he slid it partway across the table to Mickey. "Everything is in my notes. I'll leave them with you to read. If you want to discuss this further, feel free to call me, and I'd be happy to help. If it's all right, I'd like to leave now because I have a dinner reservation with my wife." "Of course. Thank you for your help, Doctor. I have one question. You mentioned that there are 2 personalities in her mind. If we removed everything about one of those lives, would she only be left with the other one?" The doctor paused for a moment to think. "I'm not really sure. This case is unlike anything I've seen before. I think she could go in 2 directions. She might completely break down and need constant medical support, or she could accept the remaining personality, but we can't know for sure. Mickey thanked the doctor for his time and promised that an extra payment would be in his account the next day. Afterward, the doctor joined his wife for dinner and explained where he had been. He told her that he felt scared when he discovered the truth. He left out some details because he knew they could put people at risk. After their meal, they left the restaurant and headed home. While driving on the A2 at 60 miles per hour, they reached the Kidbrook interchange. A large truck was parked on the side of the road with its hazard lights flashing when the driver got a phone call. He put the truck in gear and drove through the red light, crossing into the main road. As he looked up, he saw a red Jaguar trying to stop, but it couldn't in time and crashed into the side of the truck. In an instant, a well-known psychiatrist and his wife lost their lives, while the truck driver faced the possibility of being in jail for a couple of years. His boss assured him he would be financially fine, and he thought that English jails were much better than those back in Romania. Mickey sat down to read the doctor's notes. He finally had the truth. As frustrated as he felt with a woman named Tanya, he admired her commitment to him and how she had tried to be his girlfriend. It made sense why her mental health had suffered after becoming pregnant. He wished he hadn't rushed to end his meeting with the doctor because he had more questions. It was unclear if her other life was real or imagined. How could she be married to Matt and still have these other experiences? Maybe in her mind she believed she was married to him but really wasn't. And who was Mr. Smith? The only Mr. Smith he could think of was the doctor who treated her mother, but she was no longer alive. This raised questions about Lucas, too. He was clever and should have seen through her, given his own connections. Unless he was involved, but that didn't seem right. He was the one who exposed the last problem. Mickey decided to ask Tony T to do some careful investigation with the information he had. Right now, all he cared about was making sure that his twins remained safe inside Tanya until they were born. By the time that happened, he planned to have a well-thought-out strategy. 9 weeks after the accident, Matt woke up from his coma. Doctors examined him and, after days of tests, found that most of his brain functions were fine. However, he was dealing with severe headaches, which were caused by a titanium plate placed under his skin to support part of his skull. The doctors discussed his injuries with him and mentioned that he would likely have a limp. Until he was fully moving again, they could not completely understand how this would affect his life. But since he was young and healthy before the accident, there was a good chance he could still live a fairly normal life. In the weeks following his awakening, he had several meetings, but they were kept short to help him recover. The fire brigade assured him he would still have a job, but deep down, he knew that he would never return to being an active firefighter. Those days were behind him. During a checkup on his progress, Matt asked if his wife had been informed about his recovery. He had expected to see her now that he was awake. The doctor and nurse looked surprised. His records showed he was single and no one had come forward claiming to be his wife. Matt insisted she had been there as he recalled her speaking to him and expressing her love. "I do love you, Matt." Matt turned his head toward the person who had entered the room and was listening to the doctor. He thought she was just another nurse, but he immediately recognized the voice. It was Anne. She looked well and as lovely as ever. The doctor and nurse excused themselves and left the two alone. Anne approached Matt and gently kissed him on the lips. "I've missed you, Matt. I've prayed every day since I learned you were here that you would recover and come back to me. It was me who had been talking to you. The biggest mistake of my life was letting you go when Lance walked in on us. I had loved you long before that. I should have." Matt reached up and pulled her down for a passionate kiss, wanting to stop her words. The feel of her soft lips seemed to erase the worries of the past few years in that moment. Just then, a small cough broke the silence, a gentle sound meant to get their attention. When Matt and Anne parted, they noticed someone standing there. It was Lance, wearing a grin. He chuckled lightly as he spoke. "Well, at least this time I'm not going to get upset with you." Matt and Anne exchanged nervous glances at Lance. Anne hadn't seen him since their difficult breakup when he had reacted strongly after discovering them together. When the split happened, Anne quickly understood that her relationship with Lance was over. She found a job at a hospital in London and had decided to make it her new home. "Lance, why are you here? We are done. We're divorced." Before she could say more, Lance interjected, "It's nice to see you're all right, Anne, but I'm actually here to see Matt." At that moment, two other men entered the room. Matt recognized one man vaguely as Lance's partner in the security business. The other man seemed older, distinguished, and somewhat authoritative. "Matt, do you remember my partner, Kevin?" Matt nodded. "Hello, it's good to see you well," Matt said, shaking Kevin's hand. The other man came forward and introduced himself. "Good day, Matt. My name is not important right now, but I assure you we are here to help you. Kevin and Lance can vouch for me." The three men shared a glance and smiled, but their faces soon turned serious. The unnamed man continued, "Matt, Mark reached out to me some time ago. It caught me off guard because he wanted to leave behind the connections we had with him. Many of us owed him a debt, so we agreed to assist. I think you know what Mark asked us for, but first, let's hear your story." The man glanced at Anne, as if suggesting she should leave. Anne started to step away, but Matt called out, "Anne, please stay. A lot has happened since we split, and you might feel differently about me after you hear what I have to say. It's better if I share everything at once. Some of it still hurts." The four men stayed, and Matt began telling his story from the moment Lance changed his life to where he found himself in the hospital now. He mentioned that Mark had died in the explosion and that some of his co-workers had visited him in the past few days. They were wounded, both physically and emotionally, because of the tragedy. "All right, Matt, this won't be public knowledge and will remain private, but you were set up. Someone lured you there. We aren't sure if they intended to target you, Mark, or both of you. The basement was tightly sealed with heavy plastic sheeting, which we believe was used to contain gas. The gas supply had been reconnected and filled that space. We found parts of a detonator that seemed to be triggered remotely. Records from the nearest mobile tower show a call was made that we think was the signal to set off the device. Mr. Smith, Mr. Jones, and Mickey were somehow connected to this situation." Anne stepped in to speak. "There were 3 people who visited Matt after the police protection ended. I saw them leave his room. When I asked the nurse how they got in, one of the men showed a government ID with a phone number. It connected to a Mr. Smith. The unnamed man opened his bag and took out his iPad. A moment later, he handed it to Anne. "Yes, that's one of the men. He was with the woman." She gave it back and pulled up a picture of Tammy, who Anne recognized as the woman. When he showed her another picture, Anne said she didn't know the man. He then pulled up a different photo, and Anne confirmed it was him, remembering how the nurse had said the man gave her a bad feeling. He turned the tablet to show Matt the image. "Is this Mr. Jones?" Matt nodded. He swiped to the unfamiliar photo and asked Matt again, "And is this Mr. Smith?" Matt nodded once more. "Okay, gentlemen, we now know who we are dealing with. What we don't know is why they are involved with a simple gang leader. I'll do some digging to find out more. Matt, the police will arrive tomorrow and you need to act like you don't know anything." Matt nodded. The 3 men shook his hand again and said goodbye, leaving Anne with him. In the following days, Anne and Matt reconnected. She learned about his life, how he had tried to find her but eventually had to stop. Anne shared how she thought of him every day and how she finally found the courage to return to Bournemouth, only to discover his grandmother had passed away and that Matt had moved on. Every path she took led to a dead end, and like Matt, she too had given up. While he had married Tanya, Anne had a few short relationships that didn't last. She had her moments of fun, but they were brief and scattered. Anne worked with Matt as part of his recovery team, helping him become more mobile as he adjusted to walking with a limp. Matt often felt self-conscious about the plate in his skull, but as his hair grew longer, it became less noticeable, aside from some scars on his face. Anne assured him that it didn't matter to her. Matt thought of calling Graham, but found the number was no longer in service. He tried his home number and was met with silence, followed by Graham's wife breaking down in tears. She explained that Graham had been taking time off work without her knowing. He had taken a day off and then died at a railway crossing, leaving a note to say he was sorry. Matt expressed his condolences and promised to visit her when he could. Matt believed that Lance and his friends were seeking revenge for Mark's death. He could see it in their expressions during their visit. Whatever they planned to do, he wanted to be involved. If they didn't let him in, he would do everything he could to make things very difficult for Mickey, Mr. Jones, Tanya, and Mr. Smith if he could find him. When Matt left the hospital, he moved in with Anne because they thought it would keep him safe if Smith, Jones, or Mickey tried to come around. On their first night together, they were close in a way that felt natural. As they lay together afterward, Anne promised she would never let him go again. Matt kissed her softly and promised they would move forward together as a couple. Matt was still off work, so the fire brigade couldn't do anything until he was cleared to return. They waited until late one night for Matt and Anne to go to his old place to collect some personal things and get any mail. Once back at Anne's, he started to go through the mail. He was shocked to see that he was still getting large tax refunds every 3 months. He told Anne these were payments to keep him quiet while Tanya was undercover. Anne knew that Matt really disliked Tanya, even to the point of hating her. She didn't worry that he would go back to her until a few minutes later. He found a plain brown envelope that had no address and had been delivered by hand. When he opened it, he found 2 photographs. The first one was of Graham sitting on the railway tracks, and Matt understood it was likely near the end of Graham's life. He looked at it with anger. In big, bold letters, someone had written, "This was on you." He wished he hadn't been stopped that night when he confronted Mr. Jones. He felt responsible for Graham's death. The second photograph made him stop. It was a CT scan with 2 arrows marking what looked like 2 fetuses. There was a note that said, "Who's the daddy?" along with a smiley face. The scan was recent, and although he didn't recognize the last name, he knew the first name, Tammy, belonged to Tanya. He started to feel anxious just as Anne walked in from the kitchen smiling, but her expression quickly changed to worry when she saw the look on his face. She rushed to him and asked what was wrong. He handed her the photo, and she immediately saw the connection. At a loss for words, she sat beside him, wrapping her arm around him. "Whatever happens, I'm here for you, and I mean it. No matter what." Matt struggled to imagine how things would turn out. He remembered a line in the document he had signed. The government would take responsibility. He didn't know if this was a cruel joke or not, but looking back at the scan dates, he realized that the last time Tanya had held him against his will might have been when she became pregnant with the children. Why was she so messed up to think it was okay to do this to him? Did she really believe this would somehow bring them back together? No, he was determined to fight against this. He tried to push it from his mind in the following weeks, but he struggled to find a way to cope. He reached out to Kevin and Lance to share what he knew about Graham. A small group of former SAS members was now working on a plan. Matt went to their office with Anne for another meeting. They told Matt that even after further investigation, they couldn't figure out why Tanya was so deeply involved in Mickey's life. There were rumors suggesting he was trying to become a high-end arms dealer, acting as a middleman for the Russians, and this allowed them to create a plan. The stranger who had been with Lance and Kevin at the hospital provided a fake background for a mercenary company. They started looking on the dark web for high-quality weapons. It didn't take long for Mickey to catch on to this, and soon a meeting was set up with a deal arranged. Within weeks, a large shipment of weapons was expected to arrive in the UK, and a deal was made for £6 million at a location that would be revealed on the day of the exchange. Once Mickey learned a good part of the truth, Tammy became trapped. She was always with Mickey or one of his guards. She had no personal phone. Mickey even sat with her while he called Tony T, who accessed her laptop to see everything she did online, including her emails. Mickey opened her mail, checked it, and any advertisements or catalogs were thrown away without her seeing them. Tammy was entirely cut off from the outside world. As the babies grew inside her and she felt them move, she loathed herself for what had happened. Mickey was not meant to be their father, but deep down she feared the children might not even be his. She desperately wanted to escape from him before they were born. She worried that if the children were clearly not his, a quick DNA test would ruin Mickey, and she dreaded what he might do in response. She thought he wouldn't stop at harming her. He might even go after the children and Matt. She needed to reach out to Graham or find a way to contact Mr. Smith, as she had lost touch with him. Lucas was now avoiding her as much as possible. She had no idea that Graham was already gone. Mickey spent many weeks thinking about the doctor's report on Tanya. After speaking with Tony T, he found evidence confirming that she was indeed Tanya. He even searched online and found an old photo of her through an archived website. She appeared in a picture from an old news article about Graham's award. She was wearing police clothing. In the article, she talked about an undercover case linked to some people. Tony found strong evidence showing that Graham was likely involved, and it seemed that this woman, Tanya, was too. Even more troubling, he discovered a picture online that had been taken down a year ago, showing Tanya and Matt at their wedding. Mickey left his house, took a sledgehammer from the garage, and walked to the Porsche he had gotten for Tanya. She watched from the window, knowing something very wrong had occurred. Afterward, she prepared dinner for them both and tried to be quiet around Mickey, bracing herself for him to react angrily, but he remained calm after the earlier incident she had seen. After dinner, they went to the living room. He turned on the TV while they sat in separate chairs, unlike a few months ago when they would have cuddled on the sofa. After a while, Mickey stepped out and then returned to the room. He went to the TV and put an SD card into it. "I think we need to talk, Tanya," he said. She sat still in her chair, unable to look away from the blank TV screen. He had used her name. "I really thought you loved me, but maybe that's not true. I understand now why Matt acted the way he did when he saw you. Are you still married, or is it over?" She continued to stare at the screen and quietly whispered her reply. It was annulled. "What about my first question?" "I loved you at first, but now I'm unsure. I was meant to be with Matt and start a family with him after—" Mickey burst into laughter, a loud, joyful laugh that brought tears to his eyes. Tanya turned to look at him, tears forming in her own eyes. "Oh, Tanya, you and Matt should have your own TV show. The last time I laughed this hard was when I realized that tattoo was your symbol of love for each other. What happened to that tattoo, Tanya?" "It's gone, Mickey. You replaced it." "Yes, I did. Now just watch the screen. Think of erasing that tattoo as step one in moving on from Matt. This will either push him away, or you'll be living in a lot of trouble." Mickey changed the channel on the TV, and a video clip began to play. Tanya quickly recognized it as the footage she had been searching for. It was a short clip, about 5 minutes long, but she understood why the government wanted to get it so badly. As she was watching the movie, Mickey quietly moved behind her and took a picture on his phone. The photo showed Tanya sitting in front of the TV with the movie playing in the background. He opened WhatsApp and found a contact labeled King Leach. He had received this number through a text that suggested he could sell or trade the SD card. Mickey sent the photo with a brief message. "Tanya knows the truth. If you come after me or her, this will go public." He had only communicated with this number once before after dealing with a government issue. Back then, he had warned that the SD card would stay hidden if they left him to run his business quietly. If they harmed him or his family, he would make the SD card known. Since that warning, they had left him alone. He turned to Tanya, who looked shocked. "You see, Tanya, if I lose this SD card, my life is in danger. They know you've seen what's on it. They can't let you live if they get it back and it hasn't been shared. Your best chance to stay safe is to stick with me. Let's have a family, and we can raise our kids together. Even though I have my feelings toward you, I have come to care for you. We can build a life through our children. It's your only chance to avoid trouble." Mickey left Tanya staring at the dark TV screen, took the SD card, and went to his bedroom. Tanya sat there for over an hour, lost in thought. She couldn't figure out how to escape this situation. When she went to bed, she found her way next to Mickey, snuggling against his back. "You're right, Mickey. For our children's sake, we can make this work." She wasn't fully sure she believed it, but it felt like her only path forward. Everything would change when the babies arrived. Smith was surprised to hear the message tone after so long. He opened his phone, and his heart sank before he even saw the image. He realized that Tanya now knew too much about why they needed the SD card. He had to act fast. He messaged Mr. Jones, warning him that Tanya's cover was at risk and he needed to be careful. There was no reply, which didn't shock him. Jones was now seen as a significant threat. It didn't matter that two plans were now in place, Doomsday 1 and Doomsday 2. The first option could save Jones and Tanya, but the second was to clear everything connected to Mickey. Time was running out. Lucas read the message and wasn't surprised. He knew Mickey had other options and was aware that Tony T was determined enough to find the truth. He went to the safe in his apartment, opened it, and pulled out a folder. He looked through the file and returned several papers to the safe. He was going to meet Mickey tomorrow to share some new information he had gotten from his secret sources. The next day, Mickey greeted Lucas at his house. This was normal, but Mickey usually didn't have a gun hidden in the back of his pants. Lucas also had a gun tucked under his jacket. They went to Mickey's home office. "I've spent a few weeks looking into Graham. Something didn't seem right about him. I used some connections and got this." He handed Mickey a file. "It looks like there is a big plan against you, Mickey." Mickey opened the file and saw important information. It mentioned her past work with Graham and how the doctor treating her mother was linked to her. There was also a picture of her and Matt on their wedding day. Everything matched the details that Tony T had found, plus the doctor's notes on Tanya. The men exchanged looks. "I'm sorry, Mickey. She's played us both. She got to you through me. I have to say, I've never seen anyone go to such lengths to reach you, but why, Mickey? Now that you know who she is, what will you do about her?" Mickey planned to handle this carefully. It felt too convenient that Lucas brought this up after he had uncovered the truth about Tanya. But Lucas had also discovered the first government mole, which made him question Lucas's loyalty. Did Lucas put his own colleague at risk to build trust with him? "It's under control, Lucas. I talked to her last night and let her know I understand what she's really done. She is carrying my children and I won't let her go. They will need a mother. And I put her in a difficult spot. For her, it's either live with me or have no future." Both men were cautious around each other, but Lucas caught on to Mickey's words. Tanya had seen something important. The risk of pursuing it right now was too high. But he wanted to learn more from Tanya. They spent the rest of the day discussing an arms shipment that was almost ready to come to the UK. Mickey provided details about the interested buyers, and it seemed like the deal would happen. They required Tony T to access the staff list for customs at Dover Port to make sure the shipment could enter the UK without issues. Once they knew who was on duty, they were confident their usual tactic of threatening loved ones would work, especially with some photographs to show it was serious. To top it off, they planned to deposit £10,000 into the accounts of the customs staff to make their scheme more convincing. If everything fell into place, it would happen in the next 6 to 8 weeks. Tanya was struggling with her situation, but promised herself to follow Mickey's plan and do her best to be a caring partner. Mickey made sure she had little contact with anyone except his family and trusted friends. One thing she noticed was that he always kept her and Lucas from being alone together. She couldn't help but wonder if Mickey knew that Lucas was also trying to find the SD card. Tanya couldn't stop thinking about the SD card either. Something about that night when Mickey showed her its contents lingered in her mind, like there was an important detail she just couldn't remember. One day, during a visit from Lucas, she collected the coffee cups from Mickey's office and noticed a small piece of plastic paper in Lucas's cup when she entered the kitchen. She examined it and saw a simple note. What was on the SD card and where is it? She quickly wrote a reply on another piece of paper and slipped it into Lucas's jacket pocket when she brought him and Mickey fresh coffee. It will sink the royal family. I don't know where it is yet. When Lucas read it, he began to piece together what it might be linked to. There were rumors in the government about a senior member of the royal family facing a tough situation recently. Could they be connected? He wondered. Meanwhile, Matt was recovering well. He was driving again and could walk short distances without a cane, though he knew he would always have a limp. He still experienced occasional severe headaches that kept him stuck in a dark room. He accompanied Anne to meet Graham's wife for a heartfelt reunion. Matt promised to help her if she ever needed it. On their way back to London, Matt called Lance. "Lance, can I ask you for something important to me? It might give me some closure. I don't know what you're planning as payback for Mark's death, but I want to be involved. If I need to come and beg, I will, but I owe it to myself, Mark, and Graham to see justice done." The interesting thing, Matt, is we've already talked about this. We believe we can give you that chance. It will make for a believable story about someone hiring a security firm for risky work if things go wrong. Come down next week and we can talk it over. There was a brief pause. "I assume you're with Anne?" "Yes, we're together. I hope that's all right. Anne is with me in the car." "I'm glad to hear that. What happened between us is in the past now. If you're okay with it, would you both like to come for dinner with me and my family after our meeting?" Matt glanced at Anne and she nodded. "If your wife is fine with that, yes, We'd love to join you." The next week, Matt attended a meeting with Lance and the men who had come to the hospital. Another man named Rick was there too. He was another of Mark's former army buddies. They discussed a plan, and Matt was asked to do some driving tests. The tasks were tough, but not impossible. His training with the fire service helped during these challenges. In the end, they decided that Matt could be an active part of the plan. When Matt and Anne arrived at Lance's office, Lance's wife, Claire, was there with their daughter. The introductions felt a bit shy, and while the men talked about their operation, Claire took Anne out shopping. By the time Lance and Matt entered Lance's home, they could hear cheerful chatter from the kitchen. It sounded like two old friends, not two women who had just met. Anne had Lance's daughter, Juliet, sitting on her lap. She looked at Matt and saw the sadness in his eyes. She understood what he was feeling. After a pleasant evening, they drove home. Anne took a deep breath and spoke. "That could be us, Matt, if you want. We could start a family of our own." Matt reached out and held Anne's hand, noticing that tears were forming in his eyes. "Right now, nothing would make me happier." When they got home, the first thing Anne did was throw away her contraceptive pills. Later, they shared an intimate moment together. Since Matt returned to her, their time together felt a bit ordinary, but she knew that their old spark would come back eventually, especially once they were ready to start a family. A few days later, Mr. Jones unexpectedly walked into Mr. Smith's office. With a hint of sarcasm, Mr. Smith spoke. "Paulie, I thought you were done for. There's a plan to have you taken out, unless you have something to change my mind." Paulie was unsure if he was joking. "Well, we're trying to understand this messy situation, but I do have some good news. I can tell you when and where this shipment of supplies is going. It seems like Mickey has plans to send it to a hidden group that wants to buy everything and more in the future. You need to ensure that this truck gets through Dover Customs without any problems. It will head to a location in North Kent, but Mickey is keeping that information secret until the last moment. As soon as I have the location, you can put your plan into action. Just remember, I'm on the good side. Things have been confusing for a while now, but you don't know how deeply I am involved with Tanya. Yes, she is still alive. She has seen what you want, but she doesn't know where it is yet. Mickey claims she is now his, and he won't let her go since she is the mother of his children. Let's wait until they are born and see what happens." Smith understood Jones all too well. He had a part in Tanya's situation, and he didn't want to think about it right now. If Tanya managed to survive, he would figure out what to do. One morning, 2 trucks arrived at Dover Port. An hour before the boats came in, a government official appeared unexpectedly. He had the right papers to ensure that a secret delivery would go smoothly through the docks. They knew an important truck loaded with car parts was coming, but Mr. Jones had asked for a second truck to pass through without problems. Mickey had plans to distract the Border Patrol, but Mr. Jones wanted to make sure everything went perfectly. As the trucks left the port, one was followed by members of Mr. Smith's group and parked at a busy service area on the M2 motorway for the day. The second truck moved on without being seen, under watch from government officials. Lucas Jones was in the only vehicle keeping an eye on it as it traveled into Essex towards Tilbury Docks. At 9 p.m., Lucas Jones sent Mr. Smith some coordinates for an abandoned railway area on the Isle of Grain in Kent. It was a lonely spot across from Essex on the Thames estuary. As the truck left the service area, several Range Rovers and a couple of vans left Rochester Airport, heading for the Isle of Grain. At the same time, a group of smugglers from Albania set off from South London, also heading to the Isle of Grain. Mickey had paid them $50,000 up front and promised another $50,000 when they delivered the truck at the Isle of Grain. The only condition was to go in groups, since Mickey had heard someone might try to steal the shipment. As Mr. Smith drove toward the Isle of Grain in a Range Rover, he made some phone calls. In Dubai, an undercover unit began their mission. They planned to take Mickey's holiday home and deal with his 2 trusted aides. The house would be destroyed, and a known criminal would be found among the ruins. This individual had been found earlier that day. The responsibility for the destruction would rest with the Russians. Mickey's home faced a similar fate, with orders to take anyone inside into custody. The casino and club experienced several small fires set by automatic devices placed earlier. All fire safety systems had been disabled, giving enough time for people to leave before the flames got out of control. The next morning, a team would enter every legal and illegal business to shut them down and collect evidence. Mickey's time in power was nearly over. Across the Thames in Tilbury, Essex, Matt drove the BMW M5 along the riverside toward a large old building covered in iron. They passed many large machines that looked forgotten, rust slowly taking over. As they got closer to the main building, some dim light could be seen coming from inside where the large doors were open. Matt parked as Kevin instructed, making sure it was easy to leave quickly if necessary. Lance parked his transit van closer to Mickey's location. He got out, looked around, and opened the back doors. Kevin and Rick exited the BMW, leaving Matt in the driver's seat. Inside the building, there was a large truck along with a Range Rover and an Audi Q7. They recognized the Audi as belonging to Lucas Jones and expected to see him nearby. Kevin and Rick joined Lance at the back of the transit, keeping a close watch for Mickey, his brother-in-law Peter, and the two bodyguards Matt had seen before. They were particularly alert to find Lucas Jones, who was missing. Kevin called out to Mickey, "We are unarmed and expect the same!" The three men lifted their jackets to show they had no weapons, and turned to prove there were no guns hidden. Mickey did the same, but the bodyguards carefully placed their handguns on the ground near the Range Rover. "What about your driver? He will not be coming out of the vehicle. You're welcome to send someone to check that he is unarmed. But what about you? There's someone in your Range Rover." Mickey walked over and opened the passenger door. Inside sat a pregnant woman, her left hand handcuffed to the grab handle above the door. "This is my girlfriend. She is about to give birth, so I like to keep an eye on her, and as you can see, she can't go anywhere. You're welcome to check and see that it's a baby bump and not a weapon." Mickey smiled, hoping to lighten the mood. He wanted this deal to go smoothly because it meant the group would buy more supplies without any questions. With the Russians promising to deliver, it was going to be a good time ahead. There was still one person missing, Lucas Jones. Mickey hadn't mentioned him. To not give anything away, Kevin and the group kept looking around the building to see if he was hiding nearby. They stood ready, hoping to provide cover if something unexpected happened, while reaching for the supplies that were hidden behind the money. "Where's my $6 million? I want to see it first before you see the supplies. I'll send one of my team to check a few notes," he said. Kevin nodded, and Peter walked over to the transit, checking each case and taking a note from each one. He returned to Mickey, and they looked at the notes to make sure they were real. In the shadows, Lucas prepared himself. He was determined to take everything, the supplies and the money. He planned to pressure Mickey for an important item he believed was with him. Once he had those things, he would finally act on his intentions from months ago. He wanted to make a strong statement. Using binoculars, he noticed it was Matt, sitting in a car, so he planned to make sure they both saw him take control in a way he had done before. He felt like everything was coming together, and with a smile, he got ready to carry out his plan. "Okay, that works for me. Send one of yours to check the supplies," Mickey said. Kevin told Lance to check the truck and sent him on his way. It was about 50 feet away. As he walked halfway there, he noticed a slight movement in the darkness behind Mickey and his team. Looking closer, he realized someone was aiming a weapon at them. He quickly shouted to Matt, "Move the car, now!" Matt started to drive away, but it was too late. A round flew across the yard, hitting the front wheel of Matt's car just as he was trying to escape. The impact caused the car to spin and crash into a large metal structure, trapping Matt inside the vehicle. Injured and slow to move, Matt tried to crawl over to the passenger side to get out. With the shout from Lance and the sudden attack, Kevin and Rick were already running toward the supplies in the truck. Kevin saw the surprise on Mickey's face as everything unfolded. It was clear that something unexpected was happening. The two bodyguards moved close to the Range Rover. Mickey's brother-in-law, Peter, quickly ran to the back of the truck where several weapons were laid out. He grabbed an AK-12 and crouched down near the rear wheels. Aiming at the van, he fired a few warning shots to show the buyers he was ready for anything. Rick picked up an SA-80, while Kevin grabbed a Glock 19 and a spare clip, finding safe spots to take cover. Meanwhile, Mickey rushed to the Range Rover and got behind the wheel. He adjusted the side mirror, revealing a hidden compartment that contained two loaded FN 503 handguns. He tucked one into his belt and held the other as he started the vehicle. His plan was to get Tammy out first, then return to deal with the situation. Realizing that Lucas had betrayed him for the weapons and cash, and likely Tammy too, made him even more determined. Lance found himself in a tough position. He couldn't get back to the others, so he searched for something to use. He spotted a set of metal stairs leading to a higher level. Moving as fast as he could, he climbed up and saw several pallets stacked with machinery parts. He grabbed a hand-operated pallet truck and pulled it to the edge where part of the railing was missing. He waited for Lucas to come into view, and when he did, Lance pushed the pallet truck over the side. It hit Lucas, sending him to the ground. Lucas quickly rolled and grabbed the fallen AK-12, shooting upwards toward Lance. He felt a sharp pain in his shoulder but didn't let it stop him. He shouted up at Lance, vowing revenge. "Whoever you are, you won't get away with this. I'll make sure of it," Lucas said, struggling to his feet and limping toward the stairs, angry and ready for a fight. Mickey was backing the Range Rover out, one hand on the steering wheel and the other on his gun. Just as he was almost clear of the building, Rick fired some shots at the vehicle, causing Mickey to swerve, and the back of the car clipped a steel support. The Range Rover suddenly spun around and crashed into the BMW that Matt was slowly getting out of. As the smoke and debris from the airbag started to clear, Mickey looked out his window and saw Matt on the ground to his left. Matt had just managed to roll away before the Range Rover hit the BMW. Mickey was furious. He regretted not getting rid of Matt when they first met. Now he was determined to finish what he started. With Lance pushing a heavy pallet onto Lucas, the movement of the Range Rover created a distraction. Trained for unexpected events, Kevin and Rick quickly dealt with Mickey's bodyguards. Unfortunately, this gave Peter a chance to assess the situation, and he managed to injure Rick in the thigh. Rick found himself on the ground but managed to crawl to a safer spot while checking his injury. He knew he had to take care of it soon, but he felt he had some time. Deciding to stay in the fight a little longer, he shot back at Peter. This allowed Kevin to get closer to Peter and find a better position for his attack. Meanwhile, gunshots rang out from above. The mezzanine, cluttered with old machinery and parts, offered good cover for Lance. However, time was running out as Lucas got nearer. The only way down was the stairs, and Lance realized he could not reach them without Lucas noticing. He would need to fight his way out. Spotting a nearby pallet, he noticed a thick iron pipe that could serve as a weapon if he got close enough. He also saw a chain hoist hanging from the ceiling, which gave him an idea. Mickey glanced at Tammy, who seemed shaken but not seriously hurt. His concern was more about the twins she was carrying. He adjusted the seat so he could crawl into the back and out the opposite door. He handed Tammy the key to her handcuffs, aware that she understood his priorities. As Mickey climbed out of the rear door, Matt surprised him and tackled him to the ground. Mickey had the advantage in size, but Matt was younger and fit despite his injuries from earlier events. They both rolled on the floor, struggling with each other, aware that one of them would not make it out alive. Above them, Lance pulled the smaller chain to move the main pulley. Just then, he was hit in the shoulder, causing him to fall to the ground. He used this moment to his benefit. Lucas's shot grazed Lance's bone, but Lucas was unaware of it. Quickly, Lance crouched behind some stacks of pallets and grabbed the smaller chain. As Lucas came around the corner, he expected to find Lance lying on the floor. Instead, Lance sprang up from his crouch and managed to wrap a chain around Lucas's neck. As they fought, Lance started to lose his advantage. In a last burst of strength, he pushed Lucas off the edge of the upper floor. Lucas hung there, struggling to breathe with the chain wrapped around his neck. Lance pulled on the chain, bringing Lucas closer to the edge. Lucas swung his legs, trying to find a grip, but Lance held him just out of reach. "Polly Tomlinson, this is for those women in Afghanistan and anyone else you've hurt. I hope you use your last moments to seek forgiveness, but you know what? I think he's already had his say. Let the man face his end." Lance looked into the frantic eyes of the man hanging there. It seemed like a fitting end, he thought, as he picked up the AK-12 and glanced below. He spotted Rick, who nodded at him, pointing at his injury and giving a thumbs up. He also saw Kevin, who was trying to find a way to approach Peter, who had stayed near the back of the truck. Lance looked towards the two crashed cars, but they were hidden from view. He decided to help Kevin so they could deal with the threat from Peter. Meanwhile, by the cars, Matt was struggling. Mickey had hit him several times, and he felt weak. Remembering some moves from Krav Maga, he found a small knife tucked in his waistband. But as he grabbed it, Mickey took advantage and hit Matt hard again. Matt felt himself getting lightheaded. He raised his hand and blindly swiped at Mickey, feeling him pull away. Matt opened his eyes to see the world spinning. He managed to stand up, seeing Mickey with one hand on his neck, trying to stop the bleeding from a cut. In his other hand, Mickey shook a gun at Matt. Earlier, when the Range Rover had arrived at the building before everything went wrong, Tanya looked at Mickey. Suddenly, she realized where the SD card was. It had been right in front of her all along. She noticed that Mickey often reached for the large St. Christopher pendant that hung from a gold chain around his neck. On the way over, he touched it several times without realizing. He had never taken it off, but now she understood. That was what she had seen but couldn't quite remember. It wasn't around his neck when he'd shown her the video clip. The SD card was inside the pendant. She needed to find a way to get it. While they were trying to escape, they crashed. Mickey handed her the key to the cuffs that held her, and the look on his face was clear he was thinking only of protecting his kids. As she struggled to free herself, she saw Mickey and Matt fighting, and it seemed like Mickey was winning. But suddenly Mickey was hurt badly, and he had a gun aimed at Matt. She opened her door, trying to escape. "Get away!" Matt closed his eyes, knowing this was it. He felt the impact and stumbled back, dropping to his knees. Looking down at his hands pressed against his stomach, he saw the dark red blood seeping through his fingers. His thoughts broke as he heard Mickey crying out, "No, no, no, please, no!" Mickey was choking as blood filled his throat. Lifting his head, Matt saw Mickey beside Tanya, who was lying in a pool of blood. Mickey rested his head on her stomach. Tanya looked at Matt and smiled. Though he couldn't hear her, he could see the words she was forming. "I love you." He realized what she had done when his eyes were closed. She had stepped in front of him as Mickey pulled the trigger. The bullet had gone through her first before hitting Matt. He fell forward onto the floor and everything went black. Meanwhile, Peter shifted and Lance fired a single shot. Peter fell to the ground. Hearing the gunshot near the cars, Lance turned and hurried back down the stairs. Kevin was tending to Rick. At first, Lance moved cautiously, but he quickly picked up speed when he saw the situation. "Rick, get help now. 3 people are down, and 1 is a pregnant woman with a serious wound. They're all losing a lot of blood." Rick made the call. Less than a mile away, the official part of the operation was waiting. A regional emergency response was ready to start. It was the backup plan if things went wrong. Tanya tried to talk, so Lance knelt beside her and leaned closer. Her breathing was weak, and her voice was barely a whisper. "Mickey's St. Christopher. Take it. Everything you need is inside." Tanya closed her eyes as her breathing slowed. In the distance, the sound of sirens was getting closer. It was uncertain whether they could arrive in time to save everyone in danger. As the truck pulled into an old railway yard, about 20 armed men exited several vehicles. Before the truck could come to a complete stop, a helicopter appeared out of nowhere, its searchlight beaming down. A loud voice from the helicopter ordered them to drop their weapons and lie on the ground with their hands on their heads. A few shots were fired at the helicopter in response. The pilot quickly gained altitude to avoid the shots but kept the searchlight focused on the truck below. A brief firefight broke out, lasting about 30 minutes, until all the armed men were either captured or killed. However, Mr. Smith noticed something troubling Mickey Two Guns. Lucas Jones and Tanya were nowhere to be found. Paulie Tomlinson had misled him, and now Paulie would join Mickey on the list of the UK's most wanted criminals. As they inspected the truck's cargo and confirmed it contained only automotive parts, an aide approached Mr. Smith. "Sir, there's been a serious incident on the other side of the river. Multiple people are dead or severely injured, and there are reports of a large number of weapons at the scene after some kind of battle." Mr. Smith swore under his breath and called the helicopter down, boarding for a quick flight over to Essex. As they approached the site, they saw a swarm of police lights, and the helicopter landed about 400 meters from the center of the activity. A police car arrived as the helicopter powered down. Mr. Smith showed his credentials, handed over a letter, and got into the car, which took him to a corrugated steel building near the river. The scene was chaotic, with people moving everywhere, 2 crashed vehicles, and clear signs of a gunfight. What caught his eye was a body covered by a blanket, and paramedics were desperately trying to save someone nearby, though Mr. Smith couldn't tell who it was. As he moved forward, a policeman stopped him. Mr. Smith presented his credentials along with a letter from the Home Secretary explaining that he had authority under Operation Doomsday, meaning this situation was now under his control. Just then, a man who had previously met Matt in the hospital with Lance approached Mr. Smith. His name was Tristan Cooper, a senior figure in MI5. He handed a letter to Mr. Smith. "Hello, Trevor. I figured you'd show up eventually. It seems my letter from the Prime Minister outranks your letter from the Home Secretary." Tristan gave a knowing look and walked away as Mr. Smith watched, realizing this situation was more complicated than he had thought. Smith called out to him, "This is a special operation, Tristan. Please let me into the building." Tristan turned back and quickly approached Trevor, grabbing him by the jacket and pulling him close. "There are people in here who would not hesitate to harm you. You're not a good person. You've hurt at least two good men, Mark and Graham, and affected others like Matt and his wife Tanya." He released Trevor's jacket and took a step back. Trevor calmly smoothed out his coat. "Can I at least talk to Tanya?" Tristan pulled a gun from his holster and placed it under Trevor's chin. "If you get on the ground, I'll let you meet her. But she knew how to finish Operation Porn." "That's not happening, Trevor. As I said, I'll easily send you on your way to her." Trevor turned and walked away. He hoped Operation Doomsday would succeed where Operation Porn came so close. He thought of Tanya as he left, acknowledging her efforts. It was unfortunate she had died, but that was the reality of their work. He would move on without mourning her. 4 weeks later, Matt and Anne were at Tanya's funeral. Matt arrived in an ambulance and was in a wheelchair. She was honored as a hero who had put her country first. There were many attendees, and senior police officials spoke at the service. As her coffin was lowered into the ground, Anne wheeled Matt away. He showed no emotion, just a vacant stare. To keep his mind clear, he never asked about the babies she had been expecting, thinking they had also perished, and assumed the government dealt with it. A Jaguar with a partially open window drove away as the group gathered around the grave dispersed. The ceremony was recorded by a camera inside the Jaguar and streamed to a private hospital room. The person in the hospital bed had seen enough to satisfy their curiosity. 6 months later, Matt, using a walking stick, entered Tim's house with his wife. They received temporary passes and were led to a meeting room. They met again with Lance, Kevin, and Rick, and also the man known as Tristan. It turned out he was an important figure in MI5. To their surprise, the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom was also present. They sat in disbelief at this unexpected guest. The Prime Minister covered his mouth with his hand and coughed to get everyone's attention before reading a statement. "The King and his mother, the Queen, recognize the great effort made by Tanya Andrews and have decided to award her the George Cross for her bravery. Because of the sensitive nature of her work, there will be no public record of this honor." He gestured for Matt to come forward and held out the medal, expressing his sympathy for Matt's loss. Instead, Matt looked the Prime Minister in the eye and spoke. "This is unacceptable. You think giving me this medal makes up for everything? It doesn't change what we lost. You signed a paper that sealed her fate. You knew what would happen to her. She was my wife, and you just dismissed our lives with a signature." After Matt finished speaking and returned to his seat, the Prime Minister sat there, shocked by Matt's response. He placed the medal back on the table with his other papers. Trying to regain his calm, the Prime Minister continued his speech. "We also want to recognize the help provided by the private company KLR Security owned by Kevin, Lance, and Rick, and will be giving them financial support. We have also contributed significantly to the Fire Service Benevolent Fund in response to the recent tragedy that took the life of a firefighter and injured others. We have made a payment to the widow of a police officer who tried to help in this unfortunate event. This brings us to you, Mr. Andrews. The government finds itself in a difficult situation. We understand that the agreement you signed was not made freely. We will put measures in place to ensure this doesn't happen again. However, this is now part of your past, not your future. We want to make an offer that may help heal some of the pain." A document was handed to Matt. It stated that he would receive a tax-free compensation of £12 million, with the condition that he could never speak of this outside the room. Matt looked over the document before signing it. The Prime Minister began to wrap up the meeting. "Mr. and Mrs. Andrews, thank you for being here today. We all appreciate your sacrifice." Matt interrupted the surprised Prime Minister. Why did you involve her in this? The fact that the king sent a message suggests it's linked to his family. What did one of them do that caused so many innocent people to suffer? The Prime Minister looked disturbed by the question. He went on with his brief speech, but Matt could tell he wasn't being completely honest. Once he finished, he left the room. After he was gone, Matt spoke up. Lance, when I was lying on the floor, I could hear Tanya talking to you, and I saw you take a medallion from Mickey. Why was it so important that people had to die because of it? Tristan replied, This is unofficial, but we will show you. You deserve to know the truth. You must promise to keep this a secret. The lights dimmed, and a video began playing on the large screen. Matt recognized the setting. It was Mickey's office. But what shocked him was one of the people in the video. There was a member of the royal family looking very out of control. Please, Mickey, I want some more, she pleaded in a childish way. How will you pay for it? Mickey asked. I have lots of money, she cheerfully replied. Mickey laughed and said, Ever heard of the Essex Big Hitter? She giggled and shook her head. Mickey then pushed her down and she looked up at him. He pulled something out and prepared a substance for her. Here's what you do, he instructed. Start at the bottom and work your way up. You need to be careful. Just then, the video stopped and Tristan spoke again. The video is 5 minutes long and I'm sure you can guess it gets worse. Once the government found out, the friend of the princess had a tragic accident and died. Before Tanya, someone went undercover and was caught. They left behind proof that this video was real. That's why they decided to use Tanya. Matt, you struck a nerve with the Prime Minister who is protecting our monarchy. They will try everything to cover this up, but they know this has gone too far. The SD card is not with the government. It's with a private security company as insurance, and its leaders are not too far from you. There was a brief moment of laughter. Matt, these men and I have made a deal with the government on your behalf. I trust that you and your wife will handle this situation with the respect it deserves. By the way, congratulations. When is the baby due? Anne blushed and replied, I'm 8 months along. I guess taking care of Matt helped. Everyone laughed. They talked a bit longer about their injuries from that night. The bullet that went through Tanya also caused Matt to have some serious health issues, and he had to deal with them for a few weeks. In the end, he recovered, though he would have to live with the impacts of his injuries. Lance and Rick also had new scars to share when they got together for drinks to talk about old times. Matt and Anne left, happy about their future. Meanwhile, a woman watched them from a meeting room behind one-way glass. She wore earrings with the letters T and M. As they walked by, she touched the glass and wiped away a tear. It was the only sign of her sadness. She wished she was the one carrying his child instead of Anne, but she knew it was too late. She had once carried his child but lost it. When the bullet hit her and she lay on the ground, she noticed it made no difference to him. She had tried to save him, possibly at the cost of her own life. In that moment, she understood that part of her life was gone for good. She had lost one of the 2 children she was having. Testing revealed there had been 2 fathers, a rare situation known as homopaternal superfecundation. The doctors found some unusual things in her blood, linked to a contraceptive implant they discovered. It turned out that the hormones from it were likely why she had twins. She knew what had happened to her children and who their fathers were. She felt regret over the past, but was now facing a different reality. She could never have children again because of the damage done when she was shot. The surviving child would be given to Mickey's family, as the agreement she signed stated. How could someone thought to be dead raise a child? With support from Tristan Cooper, Tanya had turned down the government's financial offer and a new identity. She made it clear that all she wanted was to focus on her work. In the end, she achieved her goals with Tristan's help and reached new heights in her career. After extensive therapy, she now had medication to help manage her dissociative personality disorder, but that felt less important now. The therapy revealed that focusing on one clear goal helped her stay grounded. As the new head of the department, taking over from Mr. Smith, who had retired, she saw a quick rise in her career ahead. The only thing she thought was unnecessary was the Prime Minister's decision to give her the apartment she had briefly stayed in. It overlooked the Thames at 1 Blackfriars. This was set to be her new home for many years. One of her first tasks was to repair the damage done to the department by Messrs. Smith and Jones, and of course safeguard the monarchy. It appeared that a certain princess was struggling to fulfill her roles as a mother, a devoted wife, and a princess. Miss Andrews was assigned the job of resolving this issue. She understood that it was her responsibility to tackle difficult problems for the country, and she saw this as the first step in her mission. On a gray Wednesday afternoon, the princess and her children were supposed to open a new hospital wing in Colchester. Unfortunately, her children were sick with a stomach bug, so she went alone. A new pilot flew her there in a helicopter. After the formal opening, she began her journey home. She felt unfulfilled, as this was not what she had envisioned when marrying into the royal family. She sought fame and wealth. The pilot didn't turn to speak with her, but communicated through the headphones. They were soon on their 20-minute trip back to London Airport when the pilot declared an emergency, as the engine seemed to fail, causing the helicopter to crash into the Thames estuary. It took several days to find the helicopter. The black box was discovered a mile from the crash site, having separated during the impact. When retrieved, there were no bodies in the wreck. It was presumed they were lost to the tide and carried away by the sea. The wreck was secretly raised to the surface on the first night. The pilot, an Australian named Paulie Tomlinson, was taken from the wreckage. It turned out he had died before the helicopter took off, controlled remotely. All evidence of this was erased before the wreck was put back into the estuary. Divers had quickly removed the black box after the crash to create confusion before the wreck was officially located days later. The nation would mourn the princess's loss. Yet, behind closed doors, the royal family would quietly celebrate the end of a serious burden that could have threatened their stability. Smith lost his job the morning after a failed mission called Doomsday. Within a week, he was officially retired. 9 months later, he was enjoying a comfortable pension and had a son at the Royal Military Academy at Sandhurst, ready to follow in his footsteps. Mr. and Mrs. Smith had a nice dinner at their favorite French restaurant in London and were relaxing in St. James Park, watching people pass by. A van with the words, City of London Council on it pulled up nearby, and some gardeners began working on the bushes behind them. Suddenly, they both felt a sharp jab in their necks. Everything went dark. When they woke up, they found themselves on a private jet that looked very much like the ones they used to travel on. As they regained awareness, they realized it was the same jet they had taken to pick up Tanya from Lyon and take her to Dubai. When they tried to move, they discovered they were handcuffed to their seats. Despite their attempts to talk and move, 3 people at the other end of the plane ignored them. There were 2 men and a woman with dark hair. Eventually, the woman stood up and walked over to them. Mr. Smith was surprised to see it was Tanya. She looked very different. All her earrings were gone, her hair was dyed black and longer, and it seemed she had undergone some changes in her appearance. She almost looked like a different person. Hello to you both. As you can see, I'm very much alive and doing well for myself. I'm not afraid to make tough choices. My determination has helped me reach my goals. I'm where I want to be now, and I worked hard to get here, she said. Now about those choices, I had to make a difficult one, which is why you are both here. But it's for king and country, so I hope you understand. Tanya walked back to join her colleagues. Mr. Smith chuckled, which made Mrs. Smith look at him in confusion. It might not be exactly the same, but that's similar to what I told Tanya when we met in London a month before her trip to Dubai. I can see the irony in her speech, he said. Sometime later, the plane landed at a remote airport in Africa. Tanya, her colleagues, and the Smiths disembarked onto the hot runway. A group of vehicles arrived, and a man in military attire who seemed important greeted Tanya and her colleagues with a handshake. They approached the Smiths. "Hello? We meet again," he said loudly. He looked somewhat familiar, but they couldn't remember where they had seen him before. "I can see you don't quite remember me yet. I know you both well from the events we attended. I'm sure you remember them? You were a guest of my older brother, and let's just say you weren't very appreciative of his kindness. But life has a way of coming back around, right? Miss Andrews here has brought you back to face the consequences of your actions. We're eager to assist the British government in the future. Strong allies are important." He nodded toward 4 men who came over. He instructed them to take the 2 of them to the back of a truck. As they walked away, he called out to the Smiths. "Managing Nutangi prison has not been easy. We had a meeting with those in charge and promised them some entertainment from Europe to ease things. After the failed coup, some will likely blame you." Mr. and Mrs. Smith struggled, but it was no use. They understood they were about to face serious consequences for their actions. Tanya, Kevin, and Lance got back onto the Gulfstream aircraft as it got ready to take them home. As the plane began to ascend, the woman who was once Tanya Andrews felt that closure was near. While they flew, a journalist received a tip about a mysterious video found on a small far-right movement website. The clip was from a Christmas party several years ago, where a drunk MP spoke to a small group about sending ethnic people back to their ancestral homes and suggested harsh penalties for those who identified outside traditional gender norms. Other faces in the video were blurred out. The press would have a field day with this, and it seemed the Prime Minister would have a lot to explain, likely leading to his exit from number 10 Downing Street in shame. This event closed what some saw as a personal grudge. Rest in peace, Tanya Andrews. A year later, Anne sat beside Matt, feeling content after a wonderful moment they shared. They lay on the bed in their chateau in southern France, where they had moved a few months before. In the adjacent room, their baby, Alice, slept peacefully in her crib. Anne remembered something. "Do you recall my friend Jane from Bournemouth? She often said, 'Every action has a reaction and brings consequences.' I bet she would find it fascinating to see how our lives have unfolded." With that, she rolled to her side and kissed her husband, feeling a spark of connection as they enjoyed their time together. These days, they had all the time they wanted to be close to each other whenever they felt like it. But that might change soon since she had missed her last period, which meant more restless nights and diapers to change. Fortunately, the chateau had many bedrooms. They planned to fill as many of them as possible with their children. Finn. Thanks for watching this video. Don't forget to subscribe to Infidelity Plus to stay updated with more captivating tales of infidelity and payback. Turn on notifications so you're the first to see our latest content.